A fire took everything from him. His workshop, his hands, and the only life he ever knew. Now his father lies in a coma, and the only thing left is a mountain of medical bills. So he logs into a VR game, not to escape, not for fun, but to do the one thing he can: forge. Because in this world, his hands work again, and every weapon he creates brings him one step closer to saving his father and taking back the family forge. He will rebuild everything he lost. The story begins with an elf shouting in the dense forest, "Force yourselves. They must take down this idiot today. No matter the cost." His roar is getting closer. It's too dark. He can't see where he is. The elf ran forward, sword in hand, and shouted, "Damn it, where is he?" His comrade shouted, "He's there, behind him." Then he turned around in surprise and shouted, "What?" He noticed a swordsman decapitating a monster with one deft blow. He shouted in surprise, "Him. Why is he here?" After a while, he closed his eyes and said he didn't even know how to thank him. He apologized for all his pranks. He saved his life and protected the peace of their tribe. He would never forget that. With these words, he looked up at him and smiled. Then the system reported, the elf from a small village's affection increased by 10. First achievement, a stranger who has earned the trust of the elves. From now on, he can move freely throughout the elven lands. Then the elf looked away and added, "Oh, and his younger sister also wanted to say something." The elf blushed with embarrassment and putting her hand to her chest, said something about that offer to become his companion. The system reported relationship with the elf hunter plus 10. First achievement, first foreigner with an elf companion. He can now use elven equipment. The elf lowered her gaze and said that if it was him, she would not mind. Sometime later, they had a wedding, and a magnificent celebration began in the city. The young couple exchanged rings. And after some time, the system reported the first achievement, the first foreigner to marry an elf. At that moment, the man said, "Cut." Lee Sagan stood in the spotlight and said, he spent countless hours racking his brains over this. Ares is not just a game. All the characters in Ares are fully fledged AI that makes decisions based on their personalities. Ares is another world. At that moment, those present in the room began to say, was what he just saw really gameplay? No way. They look so lifelike. He would never have thought it was graphics if it was true. Sejin smiled and said that this was more than just a realistic game. Purim had created a new world. Thanks to the implementation of super artificial intelligence, a divine being was born. The god of Ares evaluates players and can grant special abilities for their achievements. They will achieve nothing if they cling to the usual routine. They can become a hero shrouded in legendary glory or gather their own army and rule like a king. In other words, everything they could achieve in real life is available in Ares. And even more, what is impossible in reality becomes reality in Ares. At that moment, those present joyfully said, he doesn't know how true all this is, but with quality like this, he definitely wants to play it. The audience was screaming, "This is a masterpiece, Mr. Sejin. Where can I buy it? Starts right now." The year is 2045, and Ares is developed by Purim Co. Ltd. The reaction to the virtual game created by the genius Sejin was explosive. It influenced not only the gaming industry but also world culture as a whole, and the number of players overnight exceeded 1 billion. A year later, the people gathered in the square were saying, "Wow, this is even more realistic than he heard. Amazing. Yeah. Really cool. It really does feel like you've gone on a journey." They were in the starting area of Ares, a village for players from levels 1 to 10. Then the man looked at his hands and said, "So his real physical attributes and abilities are transferred here." It was no accident that they decided to only change his appearance. At that moment, the guy next to him smiled and told him to look. It's him. Right? An event that's been running since the game's launch. Break a wooden dummy in 10 hits. They say 2 billion people have already tried to complete this trivial event and everyone has failed. If you succeed, you'll get a VIP capsule for 50 million won and a 5-fold increase to all stats. At that moment, the guy thoughtfully said that 10 hits should be enough to break it, but his friend told him to forget it. There are almost no takers now anyway. After the national team members failed and even gold medalist Hanal failed, everyone now thinks it's impossible. He was surprised. What? If even Hanal couldn't do it, is it even possible to complete it? He said, for some reason, there's so much talk about it. The guy asked, but why doesn't anyone even want to try? His friend said, well, it's because today is humanity's true last hope. At that moment, they heard a voice. Could they please step away for a minute? He turned around in surprise and said, "Ah." Then he shouted, "Wow. He's here." The players looked in fear at the big guy who had approached them. They shouted, "The strongest of the primates." At that moment, the goblin's teeth tightened and his size increased, and he said, "So that's the feeling that even Hanal couldn't break." He walked forward, and the players behind him said, "He's huge. They say this guy can punch a bear with his bare hands. Why did that dummy seem so small next to him?" Just then, he approached and swung his arm to strike, and one of the people present asked, "Maybe he won't even need a few blows." Then Modashiok concentrated and shouted, "Well then, look, the 50,000,001 VIP capsule will be his." With that, he struck, and the others were surprised. Wow. The dummy flew a meter away. Will it really work this time? At that moment, watching the scene unfold from the big screen, Kim Tae-suk asked what she thought. Soyeon asked, "What do you think?" He could only hope he succeeded. "Just no more angry phone calls," she pleaded. Then she looked away and added, "If this guy doesn't pull it off after Hanul, there'll be such a scandal." They created an impossible quest for hype. Aries is only thinking about recruiting players and ripping them off. Tomorrow all the headlines will be blaring it. Then Tae Siwook said thoughtfully, "So if he fails, they'll have to intervene in the system for the first time." But would the director agree to that? Soyeon turned around and clenching her fists shouted, the team leader will have to do this." He said, "Him, a regular team leader." She shouted, "She doesn't know. If it doesn't work out, she quits." At that moment, Madasiak said in surprise, "Unbelievable." A system window appeared in front of him saying the mission had failed. He should try again next time. He desperately sank to the ground and declared that he had failed. At that moment, Tae-suk covered his face with his hand and declared that they were finished. And so Yun slung her bag over her shoulder and said that they needed to get out of here before they were inundated with complaints. He'd also treat her to dinner. He walked forward and said that if he paid for dinner, she wouldn't quit. She replied that they'd see what was on the menu, and then she'd decide. At that moment, an employee pointed at the monitors and shouted, "Hey, team leader." A new contender had appeared. Tae-sik turned around and asked, "So does he look like he can handle it?" At that moment, the protagonist stood in front of the dummy. And so Yun, adjusting her glasses, said that he was wearing the standard set they give to newbies. This could be changed by killing just 10 first-level monsters, but the weapon looked like it was purchased. Many had already tried to get by with donations, but nothing worked. The worker apologized. He'd said too much. The protagonist, meanwhile, began to take out his weapon, and Tae-sik said thoughtfully, "Everything's fine." He himself sometimes wondered, what if? Well, he'll be back after dinner. At that moment, they walked forward, and then he turned around in surprise and asked, "What? What was that roar?" The next second, his face changed with surprise as he noticed on the screen how the dummy had split in two with a single blow. The system announced a worldwide message. Congratulations! He was the first player to destroy the wooden dummy. All stats, +5.
Fame, plus 200.
Noticing this, Tae-sik dropped his glass of drink and said, "Crazy. What just happened? Who was that? Is there really anyone left with such abilities?" Soyeon, also perplexed, looking at the monitor said, "No. Madasiak was last. Looks like an ordinary person." Tae-suk was surprised. She should wait. This sword, she should check the rank of this. She sat down at the keyboard and said, "1 second. Then she looked at the monitor and was surprised. She looked at Tae-soo and said, "Team leader, the result is somehow strange." He shouted, and of course, and it would be strange if it was ordinary. She answered, "Right, but it's an epic rank." A system window appeared in front of them which said Daylight Rank Epic. Durability 3000 out of 3000. Attack power 143. Limit none for creators. For everyone else, level 40+. Tae-sik, sweating in surprise, thought epic. Who is this guy? Who is he really? Not long before, MC thought the ringing of metal and flames that seemed to burn through everything around. The ringing of metal. He approached the man and said, "Father." He extended a trembling hand and said with tears in his eyes, "He's back." He pressed himself against the man's back and said, "Father, he will protect him." In response, he said, "His son, he's still burning. It's hot here." The next second, his body burst into flames, and the protagonist fell to the ground, stretching his hand forward and shouting, "Dad, he has to get out of the fire. Hurry, Dad." But he only said, "It's hot." In the present, the MC sat up abruptly in bed, sighing loudly, a tear streaming down his face, and he thought, that dream again. Sometime later, The lobby of Oo Hospital, Seoul, South Korea. Kim Ji-hoon sat at the table and looking at the tablet screen said, "Wow, these fools still have hope." He said that force alone would not be enough to break this wooden dummy. Then the protagonist approached him and lowering his mask said, "Hey Ji-hoon." He turned around and smiling asked, "Oh, he's already here." He asked, "What do you mean? Already here?" He asked me not to call him daytime. He replied, "Damn it, what was he supposed to do? He's always busy with his shift in the evenings, and he can't go to his father's room either." Then the protagonist sat down at the table next to him and asked, "So what's wrong?" He asked, "Isn't he hot?" Then the protagonist lowered his mask and asked, "Is he tired of living?" In response, he apologized and showing the tablet said, "Okay, they'll get down to business. He's heard of Ares, right?" He specified Ares. He asked what? He shouldn't say he doesn't know. It's the most popular game right now with cool AI, but whatever. Anyway, this game has an event for newbies. No one has completed it yet. The best players failed. But if he completes it, he'll get a VIP capsule for the game for 50 million won. He asked and Ji-hoon smiled and suggested he give it a try. He said it himself, 1 billion people have failed. Does he think they can do it? He put the tablet on the table and said, "Of course. It won't be easy, but it's possible. Because if there's one thing he has a chance of doing, it's defeating this wooden dummy." The protagonist looked at him silently and then asked, "What does that mean?" After a while, they approached the capsule and MC was surprised. "What is it?" Ji-hoon pointed at the device and said, "His best friend got a standard capsule for Ares. Costs a whopping 10 million won. He shouted in surprise. 10 million won. He replied, "Yeah. They say standard capsules have about 85% synchronization, but that should be enough for the game. Right?" The protagonist, still surprised, asked, "So expensive and 1 billion people are playing this?" Ji-hoon looked at the capsule and said, "It's worth it. If everything goes well, the rewards will pour in. You can even trade real currency there now. So everyone's fighting." Then he opened the capsule's lid and said, "Okay, enough talking. So are they going to go?" He tried it out a bit. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist clenched his fist and said, "Hey Ji-hoon, where did he get that?" He turned around slightly and asked, "Is it that important now?" He should think about how much they could make from this. He asked, "Is there a guarantee they'll make anything at all?" What kind of crazy idea had he come up with? He chuckled. What a crazy idea. It's an investment. He said he had a chance. The MC was indignant. A chance for what? What was he even talking about? He replied he should listen up. Ares has a blacksmith glass. Cool, he pointed at him and added, Kang Hyun-soo. He needs to remember who he is. He's the only son of a world-famous blacksmith and his only heir. With his skills, that wooden dummy is a piece of cake. He replied that he understood exactly what he was getting at. Then he took off his cap and said that he didn't show what was inside him. After that incident, even he, right? That's what's happened to him now. Honestly, he's in no condition to try anything. He remembered how during a huge fire, he ran forward, stopping near the flames and noticing a man lying on the ground. He cried out in fear, "Father." He rushed towards him, then lifted him up and shouted that he must hold on. "Father." He lifted him onto his back, and then with tears in his eyes, walked forward continuing to shout, "Father." He thought that day took everything from him. He barely survived, but his father never woke up, and his family didn't have the money to pay for his treatment. Then he worked part-time at a construction site, and one of the workers looked at him and shouted, "Hey. Hey there." He heard him swinging a hammer. He should help from behind. For 10 years, he followed in his father's footsteps. With that hammer, he forged countless items, but now he can't even do that anymore. He dropped the hammer with tears in his eyes and said, "Damn." In the present tense, his hand twitched, and he said, after that day, he can't even use his right hand, let alone forge. Now even ordinary work is difficult for him. Then he put the cap on his head and added, he should listen. He knows that he meant well. He will deal with his own problems, so he should take this and return it. He put his hood on and walking in the opposite direction said, he shouldn't throw 10 million and one down the drain. Idiot. Okay. It's time for him to go to his part-time job. He went. He walked to the door, and Ji-hoon said that he was the idiot, not him. Did he think he didn't know that he was trying his best to pay the hospital bills? And how long can he go on like this? Okay. They will admit that he can live like this forever. But what about his own life? Is he really going to be crippled forever? He tells him this will fix everything. The treatment costs about 1,000,000,001. Right? Of course, it's a lot of money, but that doesn't mean he can just give up, right? He added irritably through his teeth. The him he knew before wasn't like this. He said he wanted to be a blacksmith for the rest of his life. He could become one. He said he was taking on these measly 10 million. He should listen to his friend at least once. Please, Hyun-soo. Can't he try at least once? He won't run into trouble anymore. They should try once, right? At that moment, the protagonist remembered his father's words, and yet it was still hot. He let go of the door handle, then looked at his trembling hand. After a while, he returned to the construction site and, walking forward, thought that Jaehoon had only filled his head with all sorts of nonsense. He needed to focus on what he could do now. He needed to earn money for his father's treatment quickly. Then he looked in surprise at the man forging iron and thought the loud ringing of metal echoed in his heart. And in the end, he still came here. The clanging of metal had brought him here. He remembered his friend's words and opening the capsule's lid thought the flame that seemed to burn through everything around him, that familiar clanging of metal. He would hear it again, father. After that, he plunged into virtual reality. A system window appeared in front of him. Welcome to the world of Aries. Character creation begins. Please enter their nickname. He said, Hunsu. The system reported, the nickname Hunsu has been created. Character customization begins. MC turned around in surprise and shouted, what? The system reported physique analysis. He looked at his hands in surprise and said Scar. The system reported analysis complete. Continue with his appearance. He confirmed his choice and the system window said character creation complete. Searching for a server. Then the protagonist clenched his fist and said, well, here's Jaehoon. He thought it wasn't just that the scar had disappeared. The strength in his right hand had completely returned. He said, it seems he owes him 10 million won. Looks like it. He placed his hand on his chest and added, I'll have to work hard to repay him. Then the system announced that he would be summoned to a random territory. Transfer to the beginner's area. Bardenlands, Lens Forge. At that moment, a man inside the building, breathing heavily, threw a towel over his shoulder, then put on gloves and said, I will never give up these damn instructors. They must wait. He will erase their arrogance. He will forge a sword better than that idiot's. He began to craft and then shouted, come on. This should just work. At that moment, MC walked into the building and said, that's not how it's done. Len turned sharply and looked surprised. Stranger, what did he just say? He replied, that's not how it's done. Len was surprised. What? And the protagonist came closer and holding out his hand said, he seemed to be forging a blade, but you can't forge a strong sword that way. He replied, he seemed to be from out of town. And how would he know? He replied that he knew. It was none of his business, but it just seemed like he was trying to forge a good sword. He simply couldn't pass it by. Len said, couldn't pass it by. So he spoke as if he knew how. Okay, what did he have to lose? He handed him the hammer and told him to show what he could do. They would see if he had anything to back up his words. He would watch closely. Then the protagonist took the hammer and thought that initially he had just wanted to befriend him and asked to join the forge, but maybe this would do. Then he said, but there is one condition. He asked what the condition was. He replied that if he proved he could, he would take the sword he forged, and in return, he'll show something worthwhile. The blacksmith laughed and said how cocky, and he liked it. Then he stepped forward and added, I hope his confidence stays the same. However, if he loses, he'll pay for his insolence. With that, he sat down on the bench and MC replied, of course. After some time, he began crafting the sword and thought, 3 years have passed already. He'd certainly talked a lot of nonsense. And frankly, he wasn't sure he still had the grip, but he had a feeling he could do it. Dad Jaehoon, they have to wait a little longer. All the forgotten sensations were returning. The familiar clang of steel, the scorching heat on his skin. He smiled and said how good it was to be back. He thought his body remembered everything. He could do it. He struck the iron with the hammer again and again, and Len, watching from the side, said in surprise, some stranger. He thought he was just clumsily copying something he'd seen somewhere, but it seems he understands something. But this must be his limit. And yet, what is he so happy about? It doesn't matter whether he enjoys it. Only the result matters here. He puts everything he has into a single skill. Then he said thoughtfully that he didn't approve, but he wouldn't interfere. He wasn't the master blacksmith in the starting area for nothing. He hoped he wouldn't get hurt. Then he looked ahead in surprise and asked. He noticed the curved metal and thought in surprise. What kind of amazing skill was that? Was it really possible to increase strength like that? Why didn't he think of this basic technique himself? Really, it could all be over in an instant. Maybe he was just trying to impress him. He had the skill to determine item ranks. Then a system window appeared in front of him saying, Steel, C rank, upgraded from D rank. He thought, it can't be. He stood up from his seat and thought he'd forged C rank steel before, but it never improved so quickly. So he wasn't lying. But this must be his limit. There's no way he could raise the rank any higher. Well, he'd have to hammer away as much as he wanted. A few cheap tricks wouldn't change anything. Without skills, he was no better than him in this world. When morning came, Len sat up on the bench and rubbing his eyes, asked if he had dozed off. That rookie had kept him sitting up late. Then he looked ahead in surprise, noticed the protagonist and thought, is he still forging? Isn't he tired? Has he really been doing this all night? Then he looked at the metal in the protagonist's hands and thought, it can't be. A system window appeared in front of him saying, Steel, rank B. He thought, rank B? So that was really possible? You can reach rank B without a single skill, and it still doesn't stop. Does he really want to get an even higher rank? At that moment, the protagonist put his hand to his face and said, damn. How long has it been? Has he overworked himself? Then he was surprised to notice Len approaching him and taking the metal. He said, let him just tell him what to do. He can help. Agree? The protagonist smiled and thanked him. Then they got to work together. After a while, Len held the blade in his hands and said, unbelievable a rank. You can create a rare sword with this. He couldn't believe it. His skill allowed him to determine the rank of items, and he had never even seen a magic rank item in the starting village, let alone a rare one. He looked at the protagonist and shouted, aren't you happy, kid? At that moment, the protagonist began sorting through the metal ingots and said, it's too early to rejoice. He was surprised. What? He said that all that remained was to finish the handle. The blade needed to be tempered so it wouldn't break too quickly. He needed to work hard to make it stronger. The blade was still far from perfect. Then Len placed the blank on the table and laughing, shouted that he had never met anyone like him. The protagonist said that he had adored blacksmithing since childhood. He said he would forge a magic item and take it, right? He answered, yes. Then Len handed him the ore and asked, in that case, how about this? MC thought, what do you plan? He looked at the ore in his hands and said in surprise, this. He said it was mithril or a family heirloom that had been passed down in their family for generations. The protagonist was surprised. Why was he giving it to him? He answered, thanks to him he learned a lot. Now he wants to learn even more. Besides, this ore is beyond his capabilities. He wants to see what kind of sword he can forge from it. Then MC looked at the ore in his hands and thought, mithril or something that doesn't exist in the real world. Will he be able to forge an item from mithril that he's only heard of in legends? He's never worked with anything like that, so it's risky. Then he looked at the blacksmith and asked, how could he refuse? He shouted. He knew he would say that. He wouldn't mind if he learned from him too. He replied, of course, especially after he gave him such an incredible thing. Len asked, then can he call him master? He will even address him formally. He replied, no need. He is old enough to be his grandfather, so he is embarrassed. In response, Len laughed and said, age is just a number. He is asking. He should take him as an apprentice. He replied for him to forget. He will not use mithril. He shouted, no. He must wait, stranger. A month later, the protagonist swung his sword, cutting the dummy in half. System window appeared in front of him, which said Daylight Epic Rank. Durability 3000 out of 3000. Attack power 143. Restriction, none for the creator, level 40 or above. Special stats, strength +6, agility +7, defense versus undead 8%, attack speed +15%, critical hit chance 25%, passive skill, swift blade, active skill, sturdy sword. Description, a legendary sword crafted by a skilled craftsman never found in the starting area. At that moment, the protagonist wiped the sweat from his face, and a system window appeared in front of him saying, Hansu, level 1, class none, strength 35, agility 37, HP 33, agility 19, intelligence 19, speed 353. Then everyone present began to be amazed. Wow. So he got to Ares and immediately went to the forge, got some mithril, created a sword, and completed the mission. Right? In the control center, Taesik folded his arms and said, "Actually, this is simply amazing." Soyeon looked at the keyboard and asked if he should focus on work instead or if he was facing a demotion. He took a sip of his drink and said he just decided to take a break. There was no more information about this guy. Soyeon looked at the monitor and, placing her finger on it, said, Hyunsu is 23 years old, currently lives in a studio apartment. He logged in to the account from his friend's house. Taeshak looked at her and shouted in surprise, "Hey, she found something? She's the best." She said they already knew about what happened at the arena. She was just reading the personal information from his application. He asked if the application had arrived yet. He hadn't contacted them, so he didn't think he would accept it. She replied, "It just arrived," but he asks that his real identity be kept secret. He was surprised. "What? Hiding?" She adjusted her glasses and said, "Right, he's extremely persistent. Why is that?" And then she looked at the monitor screen and said, "Well, if rumors spread, it would be impossible to escape the spotlight in real life." Taesik added, "Well, he has his own reasons for not wanting to be the center of attention." "And where is he now?" So Yun said thoughtfully, "Well, I think he just entered the training center." At that moment, the protagonist opened the door and walked inside, and Rel Sun, the instructor of the hunting training center, said, "Hey kid, the real monsters will come out of here." He sees his level. A level 1 player doesn't stand a chance. He doesn't want to waste his time, so he should get lost. He folded his arms and told him to catch a few rabbits in the area and come back when he's ready. Then MC took off his hood and thought, doesn't he see his stats? He said he'll try not to waste his time. Rel Sun sighed and said, "What a hassle. Okay, he should take any of these swords and come over." In response, the protagonist reached for the hilt of his sword and said, "If any sword will do, can he use his?" After a while, a conversation began in the control center. He'd spent a whole month in the beginner zone, which usually takes just 3 hours. And thanks to this, his base stats were off the charts. Most importantly, he had the only epic sword available here, and he still had no class or level 1. He'd managed countless artisans and apprentices over the years, but even compared to them, what was happening now was absurd. Should they really leave everything to the will of this world's god and not interfere? Just trust this super AI called Ares? Sejin looked at his laptop screen and asked if he was worried about this too. Team lead Taesuk. He was currently at the Barden Beginner Hunting Grounds. He probably had no idea that a legendary class offer was waiting for him. In the present, Rel Sun frowned as he looked at the protagonist, thinking, this boy, he wants to use his own sword. Then he said, "A blacksmith's blade. He thinks he's a blacksmith?" Then he smiled and said, "What a pathetic fool to trade his future for such a worthless profession. This place is swarming with monsters on 3 sides. A single trained swordsman is worth more than any lousy weapon. So why would someone who chose a profession like blacksmith even come here?" At that moment, the system reported that Instructor Relsun's affection had dropped by 10. The protagonist closed his eyes and thought that he had encountered someone like that in real life. A blacksmith was now nothing more than a futile dream, but in Ares, he felt his efforts could finally be recognized. The protagonist then asked who was that. Of all the swordsmen who had passed through this training hall, who was the most outstanding? He wanted a test harder than his. In response, Relsun frowned and thought he may be rotting here as an instructor on a hunting ground, but he had trained countless students and would recognize talent when it was in front of him. He gritted his teeth in irritation and thought, some kind of newbie speaking with such confidence? The system reported that Instructor Relsun had been provoked. Then he waved his hand and said, "Okay, we can try." The system reported the test was offered. Then they walked forward, and Relsun told him to follow him. His job is to teach newbies the basics and test them. But for all the few who show real potential, he gives a special test, a test of the 3rd stage. The next second, the dungeon bars opened, and several swift 6th-level goblins came out. Relsun asked, was he sure? Since he insisted on such a reckless challenge, the punishment would be appropriate. If he failed, he was not to appear here for a week. He will hunt rabbits. Did he understand? In response, the protagonist asked, is the 3rd stage the final test? He asked. The protagonist slung his sword over his shoulder and said that he would like to go through it all until the very last stage. Relsun, still angry, thought, take his training so lightly. This boy is testing his patience. Then he reached for the chain and shouted, so good. You'll see how he handles this. The next second, the grate began to rise, releasing the final 4th stage of the trial, a monster. A mad level 15 goblin ran forward swinging his swords. MC looked at the monsters and thought, almost no one in the entire world has passed the 3rd stage, and no one has passed the 4th stage. He pointed his sword forward and prepared to attack, then blocked the goblin's attack. The next second, the monster leaped upward and swinging his weapon. The protagonist thought, any blacksmith should understand this. He concentrated energy in his weapon and then swung for a strike, and the system reported daylight active skill. Durable sword increases physical attack by 52% and defense by 38% for 40 seconds. He thought the power that this weapon carries. Then he delivered powerful blows and thought there is no weapon here that can surpass his sword. The system reported that the swift goblin had been defeated. Then he looked forward in surprise, noticing a weapon approaching him. He jumped sharply to the side, but the blade slashed across his torso. Relson, watching what was happening, folded his arms and thought he knew it. A critical hit instantly. That's why swift goblins are called a beginner's nightmare. No matter how good the weapon, without skill in the end. And then he cried out in surprise while MC gritted his teeth in pain and said that the burning was stronger than he expected. He thought the first level had survived a critical hit. The protagonist said that, fortunately, all that time forging the weapon had also increased its stats. His strength was 35 and his vitality was 33. He thought his strength and vitality were fine, and Relson thought this is not the end. The real danger begins now. The mad goblin. At that moment, the monster charged at the protagonist, unleashing spikes of madness. The protagonist began to dodge, frowning and backing away, and the system reported a status anomaly, dizziness. The status anomaly, decreased vision. MC closed his eyes, and Relson said, this boy is impressive, but this is his limit. This is where it ends. The next second, several goblins leaped to attack the protagonist. He held his sword in front of him and thought, I must concentrate, trust the weapon he had created and simply do what it could. He then struck, and the system reported the epic rank passive skill, Daylight Swiftblade, increases attack speed by 1.7 times for 1 second. The protagonist then rushed forward, cutting through several monsters in his path and thought that with this, he could overcome the level difference. At that moment, those watching were perplexed and MC landed. The system reported the mad goblin defeated. The swift goblin defeated. Then Relson smiled and thought, this boy, he did what no one else could. He walked forward and said, his blows looked crude, but each swing revealed the true power of the blade. He must have dabbled with a sword before. The protagonist smiled, looking at him, and said that he simply understood that a blacksmith should be able to wield the weapon he creates. Nothing more. At that moment, the system reported, Relson had an epiphany. He closed his eyes and said, these muscles, the scars on his arms, I understand. So this is what he is, a true blacksmith. He apologizes for his earlier rudeness. The system reported, Relson's sympathy has reached its maximum. Then he asked, will he listen to his proposal? He says this because he sincerely respects his talent. Has he ever thought about becoming a Mad Lord? The system reported that a strike class was available for the Mad Lord class change quest. At that moment, Taesyi cried out in surprise. What? Something impossible was happening and offered to change classes to a Mad Lord, a class that even surpasses the epic Mad Knight. Soyeon said, that alone makes him a special second-class player. Taesyi said, that's good. That's very good, though. He thought accepting the class change quest would mean cutting off his own path back. At that moment, Relson spoke up. The Mad Lord commands hundreds of Mad Knights. Will he become the guardian of this world? What will he say? He doesn't throw around offers like that. With his talent, he could become the king of knights. MC replied that he appreciated it, but he had to refuse. He's a blacksmith, not a knight. Relson said he really is magnificent. He smiled broadly and added, truly magnificent. The protagonist thought he'd never pick up a hammer again, but here in this game, he felt it. His life as a blacksmith was starting anew. Then the system announced a hidden quest, meeting the Lord. The goal was to meet Lord Vance. Relson then handed him a scroll and told him to take this letter of recommendation and go to the Lord's castle. Someone worthy of such an outstanding blacksmith awaited him there. And as a reward for the challenge, he was to take the armor once worn by the Mad Lord. It was broken and had lost its properties, but he believed he could find a use for it. He must prove his worth there too. He must do what no one else had ever done. He believed he could do it. In response, the protagonist awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said he would give it his all. Meanwhile, Soyin looked at the monitor and said that user Hansu had outdone himself after all. Taesik sat next to her and said, yes, the spark of hope hasn't died yet. The pinnacle of blacksmithing, the path to becoming a blacksmith god. After a while, MC thought the training grounds are clear. The entrance to the village. The main quest has been completed. The training is finally over. Now, after all, it's finally beginning. In the real world, he took off his mask and said, but not before. The system reported that he had logged out of the game. He said, yeah. Right? He thought he had enough to do in real life too. He looked at his zero balance and thought that he'd gotten used to the game. But first, he needed to pay his father's hospital bills for the month and calculate their living expenses. Then he noticed an incoming call from Jihoon. He answered the call and his friend asked if he'd cleared the training grounds. He was too busy with work to bother logging in. The protagonist replied, yeah. He just took the quest and arrived at the village. He asked, really? Cool. Now the auction house is available to him. He should go there right away. He thought in surprise, an auction house? He said that equipment and items needed in the game are created and sold at the auction house for gold. 10 gold is 10,001. The trade here is so good that many people make a business out of it. That's why he dragged him to Ares. He smiled and asked, do you know what he realized while playing? He had never seen anything cooler than the swords he and his uncle made. That's why he said that with a VIP capsule and a 99.9% synchronization rate, it would be even cooler. And now they must flood this world with the works of the greatest blacksmith. The protagonist smiled and thought, there he is. Then he closed his eyes and thanked him. He started eating and thought, yes. Now his path is clear. He needs to focus on crafting and quests to earn gold. To do this, he will have to watch his stamina. It's nothing compared to real forging, but the game still takes a lot of effort. He ran along the path and thought, he should wait a little longer, father. He would definitely help him wake up. After a while, the system announced the entrance to the world of Ares, entrance to the village territory, access to the auction. He must enter the name of the shop to list items. The protagonist pointed his hand forward and said Hyun's forge. The next second, he found himself in front of a huge building, and the system announced that Hyun's blacksmith shop had been created. From now on, he could use the auction anytime and anywhere. He looked at it thoughtfully and wondered what to list first. Besides the Gwangmyeon, he only had one prototype which he forged in the forge. This one was of rare rank. The average price for swords of a similar level was around 100 gold. A system window appeared in front of him stating the item was Hun's first sword. Class, rare. Restrictions, levels 1 to 30. Attack, 36. Durability, 1000 out of 1000. Special abilities, +2 strength, +1 dexterity. Active skill, quick draw.
Description.
The best sword available to a level 1 user, crafted from the crudest materials. MC said Jihoon said not to set the price too low. Maybe a 100 gold? Then he set the price and said, I hope there's some good news. While he waits, he'll find out more about the village. At that moment, players noticed the auction and started discussing whether it was created by a player without a class. Unusual. And yet, why is the price still rising? Then user Blam wrote, Deputy Guild Leader, has he seen this one before? Isn't that crazy? Golden Shield Guild. They say the creator of this sword is a level 1 user without a class. Everyone is shocked because he made the best sword from the simplest materials. Moreover, they say it can even be improved. The Vice Guild Leader said, well, the worse the material, the lower the chance of success. Blame replied that he must have used materials of the same rank, so he saved even more. He wrote that with such a small investment, it will last until level 50. Whoever he is smart. He replied he even gave it a name, the first sword. This is the first collectible from the creator. With some mastery at level 1, that in itself is valuable, right? He asked, valuable? He replied that they will gain prestige. After all, they were the first to recognize and buy his work. The Vice Guild Leader wrote that he is a genius. He replied, then go ahead. At that moment, the protagonist closed his eyes and folding his arms across his chest, thought that now that the auction was listed, it was somehow awkward. After all, he hadn't forged for a long time, and even then, he was just getting used to the game. Then he noticed a notification. The item, the first sword he listed, had been sold. Sale completed. Adventurer's log, board, equipment inspection. A magazine appeared in front of him. He asked in surprise, has it already been sold? The pages of the magazine started to turn, and the MC said, but he put it up for 100 gold. How much did they sell it for? Then his eyes widened in surprise, and he shouted, 1,000,001. That's insane. Was the buyer the Golden Shield Guild? There was a message attached to the purchase. Hello. This is Blam from the Golden Shield Guild. They are honored to acquire Hun's first artifact. Their guild's doors are always open to talented people. If he is interested in an exclusive sales contract or guild membership, please do so. He thought the Golden Shield Blacksmith Guild, 780,000 subscribers? Jihun said that gaining subscribers is much harder than leveling up. The more subscribers, the more people follow him, and attention leads directly to profit. As for the subscribers of the Hun Blacksmith, only 82. Well, still, the system reported opening a message window and a huge number of journal pages flew around. Said Blue Hammer Guild, here's a shocking offer. Hello. This is the Artemis Guild. Hello. The Truth Guild. The Boston Guild wants to invite him. They would like to invite him to join the guild. They will support him. Please, he must join them. The system reported that offers to join the guild keep coming in. The protagonist thought Ares is waiting for blacksmiths who disappear from the real world. The value of a craftsman's skills shines brightest when backed by precise data, but now is not the time to join the guild. He approached the Lord's castle and thought that he hadn't even demonstrated half of his skills yet. His true value would only now be revealed. At that moment, inside the castle, Vance asked, "Is it really impossible?" Bell looked at him and smiling said, "Yes, my lord. Since restoration is risky, the item could be lost forever. Therefore, they needed to find the best restorer on the continent. Vance said such a master was only available in the capital. Bell answered that it was true, but he refused to meet with anyone. They couldn't lure him here to the lands of Barden. He said, okay, but he couldn't abandon his lands and go himself. This was the only relic left from his father. With these words, he looked at the destroyed weapon and added, no one had seen a bow like this before. He had no choice. At that moment, Bell thought almost ready. The system reported user Bell, levels 100. Class, rogue, no class, temporarily disguised as a blacksmith. Skill, false promise. He thought that he had spent a week ingratiating himself with Lord Vance. Now it was time to reap the benefits. Then the Lord said, so the price for the restoration will be 300 gold. Before he could finish speaking, Bell smiled and said yes. If he entrusted it to him, he would take it to the capital and restore it to its best condition. At that moment, the protagonist entered the room and said, this bow can be restored right here. Bell looked at him in irritation and thought, damn. Who is this idiot? He's ruining everything. Vance asked, what? He can restore this bird bow right here? Guards, who is this man? The guard replied, yes, my lord. It is the one who came with a letter of recommendation from Instructor Relson. He asked, Relson? Oh, he means Relson from the training camp for novice hunters? As Lord Barden, he asks him, he should tell him about his skills and experience. At that moment, the system reported Lord Vance was requesting information about his class and level. In response, MC introduced himself and said that he was level 1. He had no class. At that moment, Bell shouted in irritation, unbelievable. A level 1 dares to insult a lord. And without a class at that, doesn't he know that restoration is only available to blacksmiths above level 80? Does he even know this is an epic recurve bow? He shouldn't interfere in his affairs. He spent a week on this. He must leave. In response, the protagonist pointed out that he was mistaken. This was far from a recurve bow. He stepped forward and added, this is a gatung bow. He looked surprised. A gatung? The others looked at him in surprise. Then MC pointed to the destroyed weapon and added that he had heard from the guard Becker that he wanted to restore his late father's burnt bow, a gift once received from a mysterious stranger. It was a unique bow, the likes of which had never been seen here. Then the Lord said, enough. He was usually generous to strangers in his lands, but he was tired of false tales about family heirlooms. From now on, he should only say what he could vouch for. The protagonist asked him to allow him to clarify one thing. This bow may have been a gift from a stranger, but wasn't it made here in these parts? The Lord looked at him in surprise, and he said that on the way to his hall, he had noticed a painting of animals similar to water buffalo. Their horns were considered a valuable material even in his world, but he was struck by the curve of this bow. Whale sinew had been used instead of ox sinew. How could this be explained? Then Vance closed his eyes and, frowning, realized he was right. The stranger had been a friend of his father's, a blacksmith. The painting he had seen depicted giant water buffalo, monsters from the Barden swamps, their horns and whale sinew from Barden Harbor, both extremely rare. He had crafted a gift for his father from them, the finest ever made in Barden. He had noticed something that even a blacksmith of his level had missed. At that moment, Bell looked at him indignantly, and Vance folded his hands in front of himself and said he couldn't just let his father's relic decay. He wanted to entrust it to someone, if only there was a way. He said, "His name is Hansu? If he didn't mind, he'd like him to restore this relic." At that moment, a system window appeared in front of him saying, "The related quest has been accepted. Restore Lord Vance's Gathgung. Rank A. Reward 50 gold. Then Vance looked at Bell and said he could go. He'd call when needed. In response, he bowed and said, "Yes." He understands. Then he turned an irritated gaze to the protagonist and thought, what's wrong with this guy? His name is Hansu? He'll make him answer for this sooner or later. With that, he headed for the exit. Then the Lord looked at the protagonist and asked, "So what do you need to restore the bow?" He replied that if possible, he should obtain water buffalo horns and whale sinew. He would also need oak, mulberry, bamboo, and finishing tools. The system responded, and he named all the materials the bow was made of, revealing the method for restoring the Gatgong. Gatgong arrow, restoration requirements, level 60. Materials: giant water buffalo, whale sinew, bamboo, mulberry, oak. Alternative materials can be tested. The failure rate during restoration is below 70%. Failure destroys the item. At that moment, MC remembered how in the past he called his father and asked if he could just bend it like this, right? He looked at him and said he told him, "Dad can do it himself." Then he patted the protagonist on the head and asked if he really liked making bows so much. His hands were all calloused, but he still didn't give up. He replied that he just liked doing it with him, Dad. He replied that if he tried hard, he would teach him to work with steel when he grew up. In the meantime, he should get used to the material for the bow to feel it in his hands. The protagonist smiled and replied, "Okay, Dad." In the present tense, a tear fell from his face, and he thought, "Yes, Dad." Thanks to the capsule, their destinies crossed here. And with their skills, he can do everything the way he taught him. After a while, he sat down ready to work, and Vance entered the room and smiling said that he would also help. Sometime later, night fell. MC was busy making a bow while Vance helped him with this task. Then the Lord looked at the protagonist and thought, it's not easy to work all day. The strength in his arms is waning, but seeing him so happy gives him strength. As morning came, he thought, and yet to think, they've been messing around with this for a whole week. After that, he lay down on the floor and asked if he could go already. The protagonist answered negatively. He needed help with the frame. The reason he comes here every day, my lord, is because he wants to restore his father's relic with his own hands, right? He smiled and noted that this was true. Then he sat up and said, this bow is the only thing that keeps the memory of his father. And he seemed to enjoy working on the bow. He looked down and replied, yes. He also had many good memories associated with it. Then he approached the Lord and added that thinking about the past takes time and effort. He extended his hand, and he replied that he understood. So day after day passed, and on the last day MC said, finally the archer's gakin is ready. A system window appeared in front of him which stated the status. Rank Epic Archer's Gakin. Durability 3,500 out of 3,500. Attack 253. Requirements Level 60 Special Property.
Dexterity plus 9.5%. Accuracy plus 2%.
Drawing Speed plus 77%. Failure -1. Passive Victory Packers, Laces. Active Triple Shots, improved model, more powerful than its original form. After some time, Vance approached the statue and asked, Father, can he see? The mysterious stranger had given him this bow. The protagonist looked at him and asked, my lord, why doesn't he try the bow in his hands? He should see if it felt the same as in his memories. Vance then drew back the bowstring and fired an arrow, hitting the target dead center. He then said, it's not the same. The protagonist asked in surprise, and the Lord smiled and said, it's much better than before. Then the system reported that the bow restoration quest was complete. He had achieved a result above 100%. His relationship with Vance had reached its maximum. Then the Lord thanked him and said that he could now fulfill his duty with a clear conscience. But the promised reward seemed too small due to his work. So in addition to 2,000 gold, he was giving him free use of the forge. The system reported that the quest reward had been increased due to his phenomenal success. The protagonist thought in surprise, 2,000 gold. That's 2,000,001. More than enough to cover all expenses until the next expedition. Then Vance added, by the way, has he ever considered learning swordsmanship? He held his sword out in front of him. He then added, before he became Lord of Barden, he was a swordsman. The highest art of swordsmanship. It's the secret art of the Prime Kingdom, a technique that pacified countless monsters attacking from all sides and brought peace to Barden. He was undoubtedly a natural-born blacksmith, but he also saw something else in him, a talent for swordsmanship. In addition to what Instructor Relson had written in his recommendation, seeing his personality convinced him. Excellent physical fitness and lightning-fast reflexes when handling tools. Incredibly deep knowledge and understanding of all types of weapons. On top of all this, he would share with him a piece of his swordsman essence. A system window appeared in front of him stating the task, fencing training. Rank B, reward excellent swordsmanship. He must reach 80% mastery to gain the skill. Then he came closer and said that they were running out of time. He shouldn't fall behind. If he worked as hard as he did in his workshop, it would be more than enough. And MC thought, well, it looks like he'd received an unexpected gift. And so a busy month flew by, creating his own GAT gun, restoring the rusty armor of the Mad Lord, and then sword training complete. After some time, Vance asked, was he leaving already? The protagonist sheathed his sword and confirmed it. Then he said that thanks to him, he was completely ready. The Lord asked where he was heading now. He looked at him and said that now he thought it was time to get a real profession. Vance added that if he ever needed midnight, he could always come here. After that, the protagonist walked out the gate and thought that he had said goodbye to the Lord. It was time to pack his things before leaving. The new equipment he'd forged and restored over the years, the Mad Lord's armor, was durable enough to compensate for its low damage deflection skill and a brand new Gakken with a 60% accuracy bonus. He flipped a page of his journal or perhaps added it to cover living expenses for the upcoming quest. He crafted several rare grade bows and put them up for auction. The auction listing said it was Hun's second bow. Class rare, durability 2400 out 2400. Attack power, 94. Level limit, 0 to 60. Special abilities dexterity, +7.
Accuracy, plus 13%.
Passive skill, powerful shot, piercing arrow. A unique bow crafted entirely from materials found in the starting zone, something that might never be replicated. He said he'd see how much it went for this time. Meanwhile, Sajin, the leader of the Golden Shield Guild, looked at the system window and said, unbelievable. Even Black, the #1 player in Korea, couldn't create a bow like this at level 10. But this Hyun, at level 1 and using only low-quality materials, was still able to create such a bow. Smith, the best blacksmith in the world, had said so himself. After all, Ares rules in this game. If he is touched by a player's actions, he will grant them a suitable profession, skill, or title. Forgemaster Hun is already capable of creating artifacts of this level. Yes. Just like Smoth. He's the one who holds the legendary class title. After a while, MC looked at the amount and said, unbelievable. The final auction price is 2,050 gold. Someone paid 2 million in real money for a bow in the game. Then he thought, subscribers 3,200. Invitations to guilds and work orders are pouring in so often that he can't keep up with them. Then he slammed the journal shut and said, so onward, he thought to the sacred land of blacksmiths, to the blacksmith's tower. After some time, he set out passing through forests, fields, and rivers. After a while, he stopped at a huge tower and wiping the sweat from his face, said, finally, the blacksmith's tower. It was even more majestic in person. Then he approached the door and noticing a stone attached with chains asked, but how can I get inside? A system window appeared before him saying, this is the blacksmith's tower. To become a blacksmith, he must break the seal with a sword forged in a magical forge. The protagonist reached out to the stone and said, it's a seal like a stone, basalt, some kind of volcanic rock. Then he looked to the side and noticing the door said, a magical forge then. After that, he walked inside. The system informed him that he had entered the magical forge. Here, he can train in the blacksmithing skills required for the trial. Materials and tools are provided indefinitely. Production time is also significantly reduced compared to a regular forge. However, the swords created here can only be used for the trial. The protagonist said, the trial is to break a stone seal with a sword. I see. So they're only testing his blacksmithing skills? A sword capable of cutting through stone. With these words, he picked up a hammer. Meanwhile, Deng said, useless idiots. They all look the same. How much will he earn if he learns this? What can he do to earn gold quickly? He took a sip of his drink and said, all they think about is churning out junk with their skills. None of them care about the true craft of a blacksmith. He wiped his mouth and added, the way of a blacksmith is already dead. Everyone is here only for gold. He was the master of the blacksmith tower. Then he added, if all he wanted was the title of blacksmith, then he should get it however he wanted. He then poured another shot of alcohol and said that if he just wanted to cobble together a sword and swing it around without a soul, then that's exactly what he'd get. His role here was over. No one would ever cut the sealing stone. Maybe scratch it at best. Then he frowned and said, no.
Absolutely impossible.
At that moment, MC said he would forge a Damascus blade. He put on the glove, and the system reported that only master blacksmiths could forge Damascus steel. They recommended starting with a simple iron dagger. He said, with unlimited materials, if you know the method, you can at least try. Then he closed his eyes and remembered his father saying, Hinshu, even a sword can cut stone. He would pass on to him the forging method he once developed. The protagonist declared that if he followed his father's teachings, he would succeed in this task. Perfect smelters and equipment created by magic, everything necessary for forging Damascus, an unlimited supply of various ores, even a reduced production time. This game is simply insane. He struck the metal with his hammer and shouted that he would forge with all his heart. Meanwhile, Dun lay on the windowsill, lost in sleep. But the next second, he suddenly opened his eyes, screaming loudly. He looked out the window and asked, what is that shaking? The tower is shaking. Someone is forging. Then he went down and looked outside again, asking, what on earth is going on? Then he noticed the stones split in two, and the door began to open, releasing a bright light. He said, it can't be. Someone cut the sealing stone. At that moment, MC approached him. He said, the god of blacksmiths has finally appeared. The protagonist awkwardly apologized and asked, did he pass the test? After a while, they started descending the stairs, and Deng said that until now, they had been measuring abilities by the sealing stone. But he completely destroyed the stone so they couldn't measure anything. MC thought so he was in for a recheck. He then walked forward and noticing a huge magic symbol on the floor asked, a magic circle? Deng said it was a summoning circle, and then he handed him a hammer and told him to take his hammer. The protagonist turned around and asked in surprise, what? Then the system reported that he had received Deng's hammer. An SS rank quest had begun. He then pushed him away, forcing him to stand in the magic circle and said, there's a real test he must pass. Then MC began to teleport, and Deng said that he should be able to handle it, the god of blacksmiths. The next second, the protagonist found himself on top of the fortress wall and then clutched his head and asked, what is this? Where did this come from? Is this really a recheck? Then he noticed a huge number of monsters heading towards the tower, and the system announced a SS-ranked quest. He must defeat the invading orc army. He shouted, they must wait. This should be a quest for a blacksmith. At that moment, he heard reinforcements from the master blacksmith. He quickly looked to the side and asked, reinforcements? Him. He looked at the group of warriors, and the system announced the completion conditions. 70% contribution among 50 valiant warriors. Then Hans smiled and thanked him for coming. He was Hans, the commander of the punitive squad. The orcs were attacking the Prime Kingdom with increasing ferocity every day. They had damaged much of the equipment in the battles. Would he be able to quickly repair it with his skills? MC replied that he thought there was some misunderstanding. He hadn't yet obtained the blacksmith class, so he couldn't use his skills. He was surprised. What? Then what kind of hammer was that in his hands? The protagonist looked at the tool in his hand and thought, ah. He said he'd received it during his class transfer test and was sent here for an additional mission. Then Hans asked, so he has no combat experience? MC awkwardly scratched his head and said he was still a complete rookie when it came to combat. The commander then folded his arms and thought he'd send reinforcements, but instead, they'd been given a rookie who they'd have to keep an eye on, a special guest indeed. Then he said, their situation is dire right now, so please he should wait it out in the watchtower. There's a safe place there where they can wait until they return. The next second, an axe flew past them, but the protagonist swung his sword with lightning speed, tossing the weapon aside. Hans looked at him, puzzled. Then the protagonist smiled and said he knew he was still a rookie, but could he join the fight? He thought, so that's it. This is a double check. And Hans looked at him and thought, so he's the one calling himself a rookie. After a while, they went to the battlefield, and MC thought if he fights like he did with the goblins, everything will be fine, right? Then Hans asked him to follow Ben's squad. He'll explain everything. Then Ben smiled and told him to take care of them. He walked forward and said he was taking command. A crowd of monsters headed towards them, and the protagonist thought this pressure is completely different from what it was with the goblins. So this is what a real battle is like, but he doesn't think he'll lose. The next second, he charged, decapitating the monster standing in front of him, and the system reported that he defeated a level 10 orc. He received 86 experience points. He thought his month of training had paid off. The system reported he'd leveled up. At that moment, Ben, defending himself with his shield from monster attacks, looked at the protagonist and thought in surprise, he really has no class? He's amazing. Then MC quickly glanced to the side, noticing a monster leaping forward and thinking Ben was in danger. He changed his weapon to a Korean bow, then drew the bowstring and taking aim, fired, hitting the monster squarely in the chest. Ben turned sharply and looked at the protagonist in surprise. The protagonist then fired another arrow, piercing several more monsters. After that, the system reported he'd leveled up. Ben looked at him and thought he'd sent that huge orc flying with a single arrow. Was that even possible? At that moment, Hans shouted he needs to pull himself together. Ben. The orcs are targeting Hansu. They're attacking. At that moment, he looked at the protagonist and ran towards him, thinking that he was in trouble because he was saving him. He frowned and thought, how could he have gotten distracted in the middle of a fight? Because of him? Because of him, Hansu. At that moment, the monsters had already pointed their weapons at the protagonist. And at that moment, he used the weapon change, Daylight. He swung his sword and shouted, Fury. He dealt several powerful attacks at once, turning and moving forward. The system reported, Fury indiscriminately attacks all enemies within a 10-meter radius. Then he dealt several more attacks to the next monster, cutting it into several pieces, and the system reported he leveled up. Contribution 19%. At that moment, Hans smiled looking at him and thought, so the old master didn't send him for nothing. Since he's on their side, they can do it. They can do what they couldn't before. He shouted, amazing. Everyone, they must listen. Today, together with Hansu, they will crush the orc army. The system reported that his actions had boosted the morale of the punitive squad, and MC smiled and thought it seemed he really had become part of this squad. Then he set off again, and the system continued to notify him of his level increase. His contribution was 28%. He wondered why his contribution wasn't growing as fast as he thought. The system reported that he was pacifying the orcs faster than anyone, a hidden quest. A new, never-before-seen episode begins. At that moment, they ran up to a huge orc warrior, level 51. Hans stopped abruptly and shouted for them to wait. Everyone must stop. He had finally appeared. The one they had never been able to defeat, their sworn enemy. At that moment, the man shouted, Captain, they are surrounded. He started looking around and thought, damn, this is his mistake. They were so carried away by the battle that they had gone too far. At that moment, Ben shouted, Captain, they're ready. And today, they'll finally finish off these idiots. They won't retreat. He replied, that's right. This can't go on any longer. Everyone attack. He frowned and holding his sword in front of him charged. And the protagonist watching from the side drew back his bow and thought, damn, they've all lost their heads and rushed into battle. I need to cover them with my bow. The next second, he fired an arrow, but it bounced off an orc's helmet, and he thought arrows don't penetrate. He said, this Korean bow has properties that increase penetration and accuracy. At that moment, the punitive squad continued to fight the monsters, and MC added, but the orc warrior's skin is as tough as armor. A bow alone won't do the trick. Hans thought, is that still not enough? Will we have to retreat? He charged and shouted, no. They can't retreat anymore. But suddenly, the monster swung his weapon, causing the commander's hand holding the sword to fly to the side. He fell to the ground, and the protagonist said in fear, Hans, Captain Hans. Then Ben thought he heard them. While the others began to help Hans, he clenched his teeth and thought that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't penetrate their armor. Then he said, if this goes on, they will all be killed. At that moment, MC clenched his teeth and shouted, "That's it. They will continue like this, and they will all be destroyed. They need to immediately regroup and go into deep defense. They must quickly retreat into the forest behind them. He will catch up with them soon." Ben shouted for them to listen to his order. They need to carry the captain to a safe place and regroup. They must retreat into the forest quickly. They must maintain defensive formation. While everyone was running to the right place, Ben approached the protagonist and said, "Sir, they will slow down in the forest too. At best, it will only give them a short respite." And the protagonist frowned and said, "Just 5 minutes. They can only hold out for 5 minutes?" He answered in surprise, "Right? They'll hold out no matter what it takes." With these words, he clenched his fist. After a while, MC ran into the forest and thought, does he think arrows can't pierce thick armor? No. He stopped in a bamboo grove and took out his hammer. At that moment, a system window appeared in front of him, which said, Deng's Hammer, Epic. Special characteristics, passive skill, copies consumables, active skill, shortens cooldown.
Description.
The hammer once wielded by Deng from the blacksmith tower. He thought it's possible. Meanwhile, the warriors rushed into battle, trying to attack the huge monster from different sides. And Ben, holding on with all his might, began to rise and leaning on his sword said, they only have to hold out for 5 minutes. It's only 5 minutes. He clenched his teeth and added, they will not retreat. They will never retreat. The next second, the warrior raised his weapon, and Ben held his sword out in front of him, then turned around sharply. But at that moment, a huge wound appeared on the monster's neck, and it began to fall to the ground. Ben looked at this and wondered what was happening. He looked into the distance and noticed the protagonist who fired an arrow. The monster began to scream loudly, and then the protagonist added another arrow hitting the monster in the back of the head. Then he added and prepared 3 more arrows, and Ben shouted, Mr. Hansu, MC was holding a Han Pai Yongjin, a rare one. Attack power, 55. Special ability, piercing power plus 70%, arrow speed plus 60%.
Description.
Thanks to its short shaft, this arrow flies faster than others and has a destructive force capable of crushing even stone. He thought it was a tonga made of split bamboo. Ijisol, arrows sharpened and then recreated with a Deng hammer. Combine this with a Korean bow. Then the system reported that the Gwakian and Ijisol had been activated. Set bonus. Attack power plus 25%. Strength, 10%. While the warriors defended themselves with their shields and struck with their swords, the man ran forward and shouted for them to fight back. They must give Lord Hansu a chance to attack. They ran forward, and then the protagonist thought the weapon's penetrating power is comparable to a fatal rifle. Then he fired a powerful arrow, hitting the huge orc right in the chest. The system reported that he had defeated the orc warrior. He had leveled up. He had earned the title of Orc Slayer. Attack power against orcs increased by 15%. The orcs now fear him. Then one of the monsters threw down his axe and began to run in the opposite direction, and the punitive squad screamed. The orc warriors are scattering in terror. They must catch them. MC then ran forward, kicked off the ground, and leaped upward, aiming at the monster and firing an arrow, destroying its head. After a while, the system reported a rank SS mission, subdue the invading orc army. Total contribution, 92%. He completed the mission with a phenomenal result. At that moment, the protagonist stood on a hill while the members of the punitive squad shouted, Sir. The system reported that the punitive squad was delighted with his success. The punitive squad trusts his leadership. A hidden item has been obtained. He who leads on the battlefield, the special stat, Charisma, has been increased by 10. At that moment, Hans, holding Ben's hand, approached them and said, Sir Hansu. He turned and said, Captain Hans. He smiled and said, they've only been able to defend themselves for so long that he never hoped to live to see this day. Their cherished dream, victory over the orcs. He slapped his chest and shouted, I'm so grateful. Tears welled up in his eyes, and the other members of the punitive squad also slapped their chests. MC followed suit and said he was grateful too. He thought, the extra test is over. He looked into the distance and wondered, now should he go back to the blacksmith's tower? He awkwardly scratched his head and asked, but how should he get there? After some time, the central tower, the blacksmith's hall. Deng said, the blacksmith's tower has fallen into disrepair. All honor and glory goes to the knights. Only those blinded by the lust for gold come to the blacksmith's tower. They need someone with the true soul of a blacksmith, and that's the one who will be worthy of taking up this sword. At that moment, several people stood in a circle with the sword in the center. He added, many candidates had come here, but the prophecy never came true. A prophecy left by the blacksmith god in the distant past. A prophecy that a successor would appear and restore their former prosperity. Coulson asked, and lo and behold, of all the tower masters, only one was worthy of passing the test of the sword. Wasn't it the great Deng? He chuckled and added, but what if the chosen one was just a hoax, gathering everyone, tearing them away from their work only to say they were giving the right to the test to some young foreigner? He was the master of the Bao Tower, the Tower of Blacksmiths. Deng looked at him and asked, Coulson, didn't you read the letter he sent? This is a well-earned right given to the one who passed their test. Moreover, he didn't even change class. But he led the soldiers and demonstrating the mastery of a blacksmith, destroyed the orc warriors. One of those present asked, destroyed them? Even without a class? Then Deng said, this test is based on a prophecy. The successor of the blacksmith god will be stronger than all, so this sword will provide the final answer. He thought he would soon see everything for himself. At that moment, a subordinate entered the room and called Deng, reporting that Lord Han Su had arrived in the hall. He said, okay. He was supposed to bring him here. The next second, the protagonist opened the doors and walked forward. Deng said, welcome, stranger. He had passed the test and earned the right to enter the blacksmith sanctuary. Moreover, he earns the right to challenge the sword of space left by the blacksmith god. MC looked at the sword in the center of the circle, and Deng added, the moment he touches the sword, everything will be decided. After that, he will receive a worthy reward. He thought, a worthy reward? After all, he had completed an S-rank additional task during the class transfer test. Perhaps it will be a legendary class? Then Coulson folded his arms and said that he congratulated him. Standing in the sacred place was an impressive sight to display such ingenuity at a critical moment. However, the arrow he created was merely a semblance of a Solinarian. In the end, he was simply lucky. Without this epic rank bow, he would never have passed the test, and now he must obtain it. They will see if luck smiles on him again. Then the protagonist thought, these are the masters of the blacksmith tower, each of them a living legend of Ares. They are elite named NPCs, each with titles and levels that inspire awe. A system window appeared before him saying, Coulson, Bao Tower Master, Blacksmith Tower, Level 365. He thought impressive, of course, but he doesn't think his skills are inferior in any way. What if they competed relying only on their own strength without any powers? Then he walked closer and said that he could. Then he looked surprised, and the others froze in anticipation. The sword suddenly shattered into small clots of energy that flew at the protagonist's chest, and he asked in surprise, what is this? He started clutching his chest, wondering where the sword had gone. Deng approached him and, smiling, said just as he thought. He laughed loudly and shouted, so this is what the prophecy comes true. Until now, they've only followed rituals and procedures. If he were a true successor, he wouldn't even have to touch the sword. At that moment, Coulson frowned and thought, damn it, he can't accept this. Then a system window appeared in front of the protagonist with a congratulation. It said, Ares is first god class. He thought, he's not some brat. He's new to this. The system reported that he received the class, Godsmith. He thought, Godsmith, god class, and the first in the entire history of Ares. Then the system reported a unique title of the SSS rank, Godsmith. When crafting artifacts, he is not limited by the level of materials. His mastery increases depending on the artifact type. As a blacksmith, he will become the strongest. The class quest, the sword trial, begins at level 100. Those present began to mutter. The sword had chosen this stranger, meaning, as the prophecy stated, he was the successor to the blacksmith god. The next second, Coulson shouted indignantly. He couldn't accept this. They, the tower masters, were waiting for a great successor who would receive the revelation of the blacksmith god. It couldn't be said that the sword's choice was the will of the blacksmith god himself. At that moment, Deng shouted indignantly, Coulson, the prophecy is immutable. He turned and shouted, this is not a farce. The successor must be recognized by all the tower masters. This is also part of the prophecy. Therefore he, Coulson, the master of the Bao Tower, challenges him, the stranger, to a blacksmith's duel. With these words, he pointed his finger at the protagonist and added that only if he defeats him in this duel will he recognize him as the successor. But if he wins, he'll renounce the title bestowed by the Sword of Prophecy. He'll renounce it, Deng shouted indignantly, "He's gone mad," and the others must seize Coulson immediately. But those present began to awkwardly avert their gazes, and Deng thought, "These guys?" Coulson said, "Running away is also an option. In that case, he'll make him deputy tower master. If, of course, he obediently undergoes his training." Then he laughed loudly and MC said, "Very well. He accepts the challenge." A secret skill was used. Coulson said, "Blacksmiths." The protagonist added, "They speak through their skill." The system reported, "Now he can use divine crafting." The system reported a blacksmith duel, quest created, rank S. He must defeat Coulson in a duel. At that moment, he frowned and said that their duels were different from knights. A blade forged in a forge with a soul. The rule is simple. They fight with swords they forge themselves. The one who breaks first loses. The best forge is already prepared in the hall. He pointed a finger at the hall and said that now that he has the skills of a blacksmith, one day should be enough for forging. If he really is a god blacksmith, then see you tomorrow. With these words, he smiled and headed for the exit. Then he looked at the protagonist and said that he agreed to the duel too hastily. Coulson is one of the most skilled tower masters. Even after gaining the power of a god, he still needs time to gain experience. The protagonist noted that this was true. If he'd remained in his previous profession, battle would have been impossible for him. The in-game world is an arena. Here, incredible buffing skills depend on level and titles. Furthermore, each tower master has their own unique abilities. But when he became a god, these distinctions faded. Now the only real difference is pure mastery. He looked at the hammer and thought, thanks to the skill he'd acquired. At that moment, the system reported, Level 1 skill, Divine Creation, active skill, rank, God. He looked at the hammer in his hands, and a description appeared before him. He could create any artifact he desired and imbue it with any effect. The higher the rank of the effect, the more complex the creation. The effectiveness depends on the creation skill and ranges from 0 to 100%. Meanwhile, Coulson crafted his weapons and frowning, thought that he was a swordsmith forging swords. He was the rightful heir to the art of sword forging, passed down through generations, inheriting his father's craft. But then someone far more skilled appeared. So instead of a swordsmith, he was forced to become a master of the Bow Tower. It was bitter, but he decided to resign himself and serve the great Deng. But this Deng had brought some stranger, a nobody, and elevated him above him. He gritted his teeth in frustration and thought that he would not tolerate this. He swung his hammer, then delivered a powerful blow. Meanwhile, MC, sighing with fatigue, looked at the blank in his hand. And Deng, watching him, thought the process of imbuing artifacts with abilities and effects follows the basic law of equivalent exchange. To gain an advantage in this duel, he must emphasize durability and maximum force, the weapon's ability to destroy. This means that to obtain the desired ability, he will have to forge an item of the highest rank. But Hensu's durability and properties are only of the rare rank. Henshu, what are the plans and abilities of a blacksmith god? After some time, the opponents met in the arena, and Coulson, smirking, said that since he didn't run away, he guessed he must have forged something overnight. They would see if his creation was truly worthy of the heir of the gods. Then he began to draw his sword from its sheath and added that he should first let him present his sword. He pointed the weapon forward and a system window appeared before him. Coulson's Dark Knight, unique. Durability 12,000 out of 12,000, attack power 6 and 54, special abilities, durability plus 15%, sword mastery plus 2 levels, passive skill, weapon destroyer, active skill, light of the Dark Knight. At this moment, Deng folded his arms and thought, and one of those present said, as expected, Coulson's skill is amazing. The girl next to him said, to forge such a unique dual sword in just one night. Magnificent, truly impressive. Hearing these words, Coulson smiled and thought, of course, this is a masterpiece imbued with his family's secret techniques. Now he must show him his sword. At that moment, the protagonist took out his weapon, and a system window appeared, saying Hyun Su's first custom-made sword. Rank, rare. Durability 1000 out of 1000. Attack power 177. At that moment, Coulson was surprised. Rare. A rare rank sword? This is ridiculous. Perhaps Coulson was right. Then he gritted his teeth in irritation and prepared to attack thinking, dang. This time he made a serious mistake, wasting his time on a boy with his pathetic toy. The next second, he abruptly ran to the attack and shouted, this is the end of it. MC held his sword out in front of him and took a few steps forward when suddenly his opponent's weapons split in two. Everyone stopped, watching in surprise as a sword fragment fell to the ground. Coulson turned slightly and perplexed, said he, and the protagonist said that a sword isn't determined solely by rank. A system window appeared before him, revealing Hunsu's first sword, a rare one. Special abilities, an active skill, a sword that cuts swords. 65% chance to destroy an opponent's weapon. One of a kind, irreparable, destroyed at 0 durability. At that moment, Coulson remembered his father telling his son, "One day, a blacksmith god will appear on this earth." He placed his hand on his head and added, "The one who will shatter their understanding of the world and lead them, bringing a new teaching, and everyone will have the chance to meet him." Coulson looked at him and smiling said, "Father, if he too becomes a great blacksmith, will he be able to learn from him?" At that moment, Deng smiled and thought, simply breaking a sword wouldn't be enough to convince the tower masters, so he'd forge a sword that could cut swords. And not long before, Deng had asked, "Is such a thing even possible?" MC had said it was never easy. Creating an artifact of the required level always comes down to the blacksmith skill. He smiled, looking at it, and a system window appeared in front of him saying, "A special creation of a god." The higher the effect level, the more difficult the creation, with efficiency ranging from 0 to 100% depending on the crafting skill. In the present, Deng looked ahead and thought, Hinsu has all the knowledge and skill to bring such an idea to life. At that moment, Coulson had said, "A god blacksmith, could he also dig up such a sword?" The protagonist smiled, looking at him, and said, "The word impossible doesn't exist." Then Coulson began to cry. He dropped to one knee and said, "Coulson, master of the Bow Tower, now stands before the blacksmith god." The system reported, "Blacksmith duel? Quest complete." Coulson then approached the protagonist holding a chest in his hands and calling him, asked him to accept this. For a sire, 500 gold. With these words, he opened the chest and showed the coins. The protagonist, looking at this, smiled and thought, "Is this a reward for the quest?" Then Coulson held out a scroll and added, "And this scroll with the drawing of the legendary bow. This was transmitted in their blacksmith tower." Then the system reported, "He has received the drawing of the legendary bow, one of the 10 treasures of the blacksmith tower." Then he said, "This bow, he was never able to do it. Pass it on to someone who can become great. That is the true purpose of this." Then Deng closed his eyes and said, "Now that the god of blacksmiths has finally appeared, they too will start from scratch. Therefore, Mr. Hunsu," he asked him to ascend to the pinnacle of power and explore this vast world. Then MC waved his hand and said, "The ascent of a god begins." After a while, he and Jihun clinked drinks, and the protagonist shouted, "Hooray." His friend smiled and said he couldn't believe he was drinking beer at Hunsu's expense, and he even changed his class to divine. He recommended Ares to him because his talent was wasted, but he never imagined he was so good at games. After all that suffering in the forge, he finally made it. So what's different about the divine class? He replied that he didn't think there were any drastic differences right away. What's more important is that he needs to pay his father's hospital bill tomorrow. Meanwhile, another 10 million won has accumulated for treatment. Jihun then lowered his gaze and said, "By the way, he found out about that new medicine for his father he'd asked about, but it's not covered by insurance. So he needs to prepare at least 20 million won. Besides, he needs to treat his burns too. Classes alone won't make him any money. There's a limit to how many artifacts he can forge and sell. Basically, he needs to level up and earn fame." The protagonist thought the ascension of a god begins. Then Jihun raised his hand and added, "He needs to establish connections with the most famous people in Ares. That way, he'll be able to get much better rewards and rare items even for quests of the same level. And then using that as a foundation, he'll create even better artifacts." MC looked at him and thought, connections with the most famous person. Then Jihun placed his hands on the table and said, "So he has an idea. He just needs to wait a little. He'll get the best achievements and carry him along." The protagonist sighed in response and said he'd rather try not to get fired, but he countered. He was serious. After a while, a discussion started on the site. Did they hear that, people? The perpetually 21st place Lord finally got a legendary class. Damn. This is just insane. But that's not all. The most amazing thing is that he defeated the Sword King, Barrett. Defeated? What do you mean? His attack got through. Yeah. Right. No one could even hit him before, right? So that's really damn cool. You can't argue with that. How did he do it? How did he even manage to do it? Meanwhile, the protagonist looked at his phone screen and said, 30 million won a month. He needs to pay the overdue bills today. It's impossible. Even if you add up the quest reward and the auction proceeds, he can't let his father's treatment stop. Then he asked in surprise. His eyes widened in surprise when he looked at the phone screen. It said, the first Hunzer sword sold for 53,310 gold. Sold to the player Lord. He asked, Lord? The next second, he ran to the worker and putting his hand on her monitor, apologized. He shouted the hospital bills that needed to be paid today. He'll pay them all right now. He thought, I'll never quit playing Ares. After a while, the Lord texted him, Mr. Hansu. He was very grateful. Really, Mr. Hansu. Thanks to his sword, he was able to fulfill his dream and pass the Barad trial. If people understood the true value of the sword he created, they would realize that the 50 million won he paid was a mere pittance. Cutting through the blade of the sword king himself and breaking through his defense, even he was clearly surprised. Mr. Hansu, the king of the Goyard kingdom, the sword king of Barad, is waiting for him. He wants him to forge a sword for him. He was surprised. The sword king of Barad, the Lord asked him to go and meet him. After a while, the protagonist went outside, raised his head up looking at the bright sun. He thought he could pay for his father's hospital bills and the new medicine. He must meet Barad, and he would get his lost forge back too. After a while, Kong Hyuk-soo got out of the car and looking at the building said, a forge in their day, Hyun-soo. There was only a month left until their agreement expired. After a while, MC answered the phone in surprise and asked, what, Barad? He can't meet him? Jahoon asked, does he think he can do anything just because he's a divine class? A level 10 newbie is going to meet the king? To meet a high-level NPC, their level and fame must also be high. To meet Barad, you need to be at least level 200, but that doesn't mean there's no way. Goyard Martial Arts Tournament, an event held annually in the Goyard Kingdom with a level limit of 50 to 60. Sword King Barad is always on the lookout for talent with potential, so every year, he holds a fencing tournament for foreigners. This tournament is about to begin. The winner receives their reward personally from Barad. If he wants to meet him right now, this is his only chance. Sometime later, the protagonist was riding in a cart and looking away, remembered Deng's words. Mr. Hunsu, he recalled, he must go to the land of Castle. This is a land on the border of the northern kingdom of Drum, where hellish undead rage daily. There, his abilities will be needed more than anywhere else. He thought about the land of Castle, a war zone where they repel monster invasions. According to Deng, this is the best place for quick leveling, exactly what he needs. He must handle this, whatever the quest. After a while, the system reported that he had entered the territory. At that moment, Render looked at him and smiling, asked, are you reinforcements from the capital? Excellent. Any fighter is worth their weight in gold now. He was a level 76 Centurion. He added, the number of advancing undead is growing. MC came closer to and said, he says it's growing. Do you know the reasons? He looked at him and replied, well, when the sacred Rama's bell rang in the lands of Kessel, the advancing undead weakened and it was easier to deal with. Until recently, the ringing of the Rama's bell scared away even the distant undead. The protagonist thought, so that's how the system works. Then Render added, but recently, it's shattered into pieces. They were caught off guard and barely had time to strengthen their defenses. The enemy sensed this and began to gradually creep closer. The protagonist asked, can it be fixed? He was surprised. Could it really be from Master Deng? He awkwardly scratched the back of his head and confirmed it. He was indeed sent by Deng, the head of the blacksmith tower. Render said, you should have said so right away. They were waiting for him. Quick. He must go with him to the captain. Then Karl, a knight of Kessel, approached them. He asked, so he means to say that the great Deng himself sent him? Render extended his hand and said, yes, sir, captain. He wishes to personally inspect the Rama's bell. He replied, I understand. But Deng had already declared the Rama's bell beyond repair, hadn't he? The master had already secretly attempted to repair it several times, and all the craftsmen said the same thing. A broken Rama's bell is an irreparable artifact. There's one person in Castle who's still looking for a way to fix it, but it's all fair game. This person is level 290, and even he couldn't do it. What about his abilities? At that moment, the system reported that Captain Karl was requesting information about his level. MC replied that he was currently level 13. Render looked at him in bewilderment, while Carl folded his arms across his chest and lowering his gaze said that he did not want to reproach the one who came to his aid. But at his level, it was better to find a place where he could truly be useful. The lands of Castle were now on the brink of destruction. When the main forces of the undead army moved on the offensive, it would be their end. His duty was to protect his master and the people to the very end, and he must fulfill his duty. At that moment they heard a shout, "Captain!" A warrior ran up to them and pointing a finger to the side shouted, "The undead are attacking the eastern wall. Ghouls! A huge flock of ghouls is rushing here." At that moment, level 41 ghouls were approaching them, and Carl waved his hand to the side and shouted, "Alarm! They must hold the gates at all costs." His subordinate replied, "Yes, sir." Then Carl stepped forward and said, "Render, follow him." He replied, "Yes, sir." Then the captain added, "And more." He turned and said, "Everything they discussed must remain a secret. Understood?" The protagonist answered affirmatively, then thought, if everything goes like the war with the orcs, he could handle it. A system window appeared in front of him, revealing a quest for a territory battle. He must repel the ghoul invasion and defend the gates. Meanwhile, the ghouls continued to approach the castle. Letting out loud screams, they began to scale the walls while the guards tried to stem the tide of attack. At that moment, MC stood on the wall aiming his bow, and Render looked at him and shouted, "The undead are hard to kill without a weapon imbued with holy power. That's why you have to hit the same spot over and over again." But the next second, the protagonist fired an arrow piercing the head of one of the monsters. Render, frowning, looked at him in thought in surprise. No holy power but one arrow, and the ghoul is ready. The protagonist then prepared a flight arrow and released it, hitting several targets with a single arrow. The warriors then joyfully ran up to him. Render, looking over the wall, shouted, "They should attack as much as they want. He'll kill them all." MC looked at him and thought, this isn't as bad as he thought. If this keeps up, they'll get through this. After that, he looked ahead in surprise, and the system announced, a new story is beginning. He must defeat the giant ghoul. At that moment, a huge creature with 4 arms appeared in front of the castle walls. Render screamed in fear. Now a giant ghoul has appeared. We need to call the captain. The level 89 giant ghoul opened its mouth, showing a long tongue, and Carl, fighting at the gate, shouted, "Damn." Render, noticing this, said, "Captain Carl is holding the gate. He has no free men." He clenched his teeth and nervously added, "If this keeps up, the wall will fall." But at that moment, the protagonist said he would distract them from this monster. He was surprised. What? How could he? But before he could finish speaking, the protagonist pushed off the ground and plummeted downwards. While the other guards screamed in fear, Render shouted, "It's too dangerous to be alone." But the protagonist flew further and further, approaching the monsters. Falling downwards and flying through the monster, he dealt several blows, then ran along the wall and landed in front of a huge ghoul. He frowned, looking at his target and thought, great, he should deal with it. The next second, he leaped forward and the huge ghoul extended his hand towards him. MC started running further and thought that first he would drag it away from the wall. Had he managed to get its attention? Then he turned sharply and noticed the monster's huge leg heading towards him. He gritted his teeth and began to dodge the monster's legs moving from side to side. He screamed loudly and tried to run faster, then turned slightly and wondered why he was so fast. Then the next second, the system reported a weapon change, horn bow plus flight arrow. He thought, this is the end for him. With these words, he pushed off the ground and, taking aim, fired the arrow, hitting the monster's head, but the ghoul only grew angry in response. The protagonist looked at him in horror and thought, no damage at all? The next second, a huge foot swung out and hit the protagonist with such force that he was sent flying. The system reported that his health had dropped below 10%. Then MC fell to the ground, and the system reported that at 0% health he would be forcibly ejected from the game. He thought, no, not this. He lay on the broken ground, breathing loudly. Then he supported himself with his hand and asked, forcibly ejected? He began to rise to his feet and asked how they could even come up with such nonsense. At that moment, the monster's huge foot landed next to him. And he, looking at it, thought that if he didn't pass this episode, he wouldn't be able to participate in the Goyard martial arts tournament. And if so, then he could forget about his father's hospital bills, his own treatment, and returning to the path of a blacksmith. He couldn't lose all hope again. He gritted his teeth and thought that this was a game and his only chance to change reality. He couldn't give up here no matter what. Then he drew the bowstring and took aim. He released the arrow, hitting the monster's leg. The ghouls screamed loudly and then leaned forward to attack. The protagonist gritted his teeth and frowned when the system reported that his health had dropped below 3%. He thought he would never give up, and at that moment the monster pointed a huge hand at him. While the protagonist aimed another arrow, he thought this wasn't the end. But at that moment the bowstring snapped. He thought in surprise, the bowstring, and then he abruptly turned his gaze to the monster's hand, and then it fell upon him from above. His health bar seemed to shatter, and he began to fall into the abyss. He thought, is this the end? No. He clenched his fist and thought, not like this. He refuses to give up so easily. He moved his hand forward, and at that moment a system window appeared saying special condition met. With his health below 5%, his will and thirst for life meet the requirements of a godsmith. He can learn a new skill. He thought in surprise, a new skill? The system reported he had learned the skill emergency god creation. He can begin emergency god creation. He must forge a weapon in 20 seconds. Weapons created with this skill can only be used for 30 seconds. MC said that this was his chance. Then the system reported emergency god creation begins. 19. He thought this was his last chance. He created a hammer and reached for it. Then the system window said, 18. He can choose materials. 17. He thought, past this episode. The system continued the countdown while he began to intensively strike the hammer on the workpiece. He repeated the action over and over, and in the final seconds, his sword was ready. After that, he swung his arm to attack and let out a loud cry, flying forward. He used the sword of death oath. He delivered a slash in front of himself and flew past the monster. In the next second, the monster behind him split in two and fell to the ground. At that moment, the protagonist turned around and smiling slightly said, he did it. And the system reported he killed one giant ghoul. Experience gained level 38. MC was kneeling and looking at the system window, smiled and said, at this level that's enough. But before he could finish speaking, his eyes began to close and he fell to the ground. At that moment, a warrior ran towards him and shouted, Mr. Hinsu. Sometime later, the protagonist woke up to the bright rays of the sun. He was lying on a bed and his body was bandaged. He opened one eye and asked, then he sat up and grabbed his head, asking, how much time has passed? What about the monster? Suddenly, the warriors nearby began to cheer, and Master Hinsu had woken up, a true hero. Master Hinsu? And he asked in surprise, what's going on? Then Carl put his hand on his shoulder and said that thanks to him, they were still alive. He was grateful. How did he do it? MC looked at him in surprise and said, Captain. He smiled awkwardly and, scratching his head, said that he didn't even know how to explain it. In response, the captain laughed and folding his arms over his chest said, so that's it. The protagonist looked away, thinking that any explanation would sound unconvincing. Then the captain shouted at him not to be modest. It was he who brought victory in today's battle. Ghouls are akin to ghosts. They are vulnerable to holy power. As soon as he realized this, he immediately remembered the sword of the four symbols. It is known to drive away evil spirits and ward off misfortune. Thanks to what his father once told him about restoring this, he was able to recreate this sword, something like that. Then MC looked at his fist and thought he was so glad that everything worked as he thought. Then the captain said, oh yes, he must reward him. He handed him a bag and told him to take it. The next second, the system reported that he had received 200,000 gold. The protagonist took the bag and sheepishly thanked him. He thought, there 2,000,001. And then Carl coughed into his fist and blushing with embarrassment said that he was wrong to think that he was the same as the other outsiders. He bowed and asked for forgiveness. And the protagonist shouted in surprise, Captain. He extended his hands to him and added, Captain, everything is fine. He is grateful that he believed in him. Carl took his hands, and the system reported that his connection with the sword had reached the maximum. He added, then he wanted to ask him for one favor. Please, he must fix the bell of Rama. The sword he held in his hands clearly radiated holy power. With such abilities, he believed he could handle it. Then the protagonist smiled awkwardly and scratching his head said that he appreciated his words, but he needed to go to the kingdom of Goyard. Then Carl smiled and noted that he had forgotten something. He was a blacksmith after all. Their lord had a legendary mineral. If he fixed the bell, he could give it to him as a reward. MC was surprised. A legendary mineral? After a while, they entered the castle and stopped at a tall door. Carl turned around and said, well, what is it? He then opened the door, revealing the broken parts of the bell. He said that this was the bell of Rama. The protagonist looked at it in bewilderment and thought that it wasn't just broken. It was shattered. Then Carl turned to him and smiling asked, "So he says he can fix it?" Was he supposed to believe that? But the protagonist smiled and replied, "Well, yes." He thought it was worse than he expected, but there had to be a way. At that moment, Belle entered the room and said, "Captain." She came closer and declared that it couldn't be fixed. She got close to the protagonist's face and said, "Even she at level 290 can't do that, and he claims he can?" She smiled and added, "He's just a scammer, right?" Not long before, Belle announced that she was leaving the guild. The Golden Shield guild leader shouted in surprise. "Belle, no." Team leader Kim, what is she talking about? Leaving so suddenly? Does she not care about everything she's achieved? In response, Belle looked away, folded her arms, and said that it wasn't true, but now she was just tired. The leader said, "No. Not if she brings the blacksmith herself this time." And she pointed her finger at him and, frowning, shouted, "That's the problem. He's offering 500 million a year to some random player?" He replied, "The blacksmith Jason sold his very first sword for 500 million won. If they get that, the guild will skyrocket." Belle folded her arms and said, "That blacksmith they hired was just trying to make a little extra money, right? The next one took the collateral and ran away. Then another one won the lottery and disappeared, and then last time and the one after that." Then the leader clenched his fist and said irritably, "He knows enough." After that, Belle closed her eyes and putting her hand to her head, asked if he now understood how hard it was for her to clean up all this mess, so he shouldn't try to stop her. And then he looked down and said, "Since that's what she decided, fine." After that, she headed for the exit and told him not to worry. She wasn't planning on joining another guild anytime soon. The leader called after her. She must know they'll always have a place for her if she decides to return. Sometime later, castle. Belle approached the walls and looking around, said in surprise, "Oh my god, this village shouldn't just disappear like that." She thought this place had shown her that real people just like her weren't just NPCs living here. Once they fix the frame bell, maybe they can stop all this. They need to look at the bell again. In the present, the protagonist pulled back from her and looked at her in surprise. He frowned and asked, "Who is she to say that?" She smirked and said, "A blacksmith of higher rank than him." At that moment, Carl approached them and, with an awkward smile, told them not to quarrel. "This is Bell, the advanced blacksmith he spoke of. Bell, this is Hansu. He helped them finish off the undead. And now, on top of everything, he says he'll fix the bell. A reliable guy." Then he laughed loudly. Belle thought, level 38, helped finish off the undead? And now what? Are you gonna fix the bell? Then she folded her arms and looking at the protagonist, said that she didn't know what trick he'd pulled. Lout with that bell couldn't be fixed. He shouldn't even think about profiting from Cussel's attack. Hey him. At that moment, MC walked away and asked what she was even talking about. He approached the table with the shards, and she wondered in surprise, had he ignored her? Then she came closer and wondered if the shards had changed somehow. The next second, a system window appeared in front of her saying that the frame's bell was filled with holy power, completely destroyed and beyond repair. She thought she knew it, but at that moment the protagonist grabbed a hammer and she thought no chance. Then the protagonist began to smash the shards, and Belle pointed her hand forward and shouted indignantly, "What is he doing? He has to stop." And he said it was possible, she shouted. "What did he say?" He looked at her and smiling, said restoration. He said it was possible. She shouted, "Does he even know what irreparable artifact means?" At that moment, a warrior ran into the room and shouted, "Captain, the undead are breaking through." Carl turned around sharply and shouted, "What?" Belle also looked at the warrior perplexed, and MC looked ahead and thought, "A task? No." A system window appeared saying, "The castle territory update has begun. After the update, a new territory will be established." He thought, an update notification. At that moment, Belle covered her mouth with her hand and said, "The castle territory is turning into the land of the undead." Then she turned around and added, "So this is the end." The protagonist said that's not true. If they forge the bell, they can stop it. She asked, "Forge the bell?" "It's impossible." He said it was possible. Didn't she want to protect castle's territory? He looked at her as he said this, and she suddenly stopped and noticed he was right. But how? He started collecting the fragments and told her to follow him. The system reported that the frame bell fragment had been added to the inventory. He turned around and clenching his fist said that they would protect this place. At that moment, Carl looked at him and shouted, Hyun-soo, he's counting on him. He must fix the bell. He will hold them off as long as he can. MC replied, yes, he must trust him. And at that moment, Carl ran out into the street and raising his sword, shouted to the others not to lose hope. He ran forward and shouted that they must fight to the very end. They must hold out a little longer. They must protect Castle. After a while, the protagonist and Belle approached the forge. She folded her arms across her chest and looking at the protagonist asked, so what is he going to do? He answered, when he broke the shard and the holy power did not disappear. This means that the holy power is contained in the material itself. He took the shard in his hand and looking at it, said that he was going to melt it down and forge a new bell. If it was a whole bell, the holy power would become even more powerful, wouldn't it? Then Belle said that she had never seen such skill, and he smiled and said that skill is not necessary to have to fix something. She was surprised. Why use both hands? Then the protagonist suggested straightening the materials first. He began to plunge it into the furnace. And Belle, looking at him surprised, thought, does he mean he will do it manually? You know their time? Then he asked why she didn't help. He can't handle this alone. Meanwhile, in the control room, Tae-sik took a sip of his drink and said they were finished. A system window appeared on the screen saying the castle territory update was 0 hours 49 minutes 32 seconds. He said the update would now be wasted. Then a worker approached him, folded his arms, and asked, what is he talking about? Was he whining on update day? He told him to look at the screen. The man frowned at the monitor and asked, what are you looking at? And then he was surprised. What? Because of that blacksmith player? Then he smiled and said, no way. Player can't fix it. He shouldn't make him laugh. And at that moment, Soyeon said it wasn't just a player. Meanwhile, the territory update continued. The warriors fought the undead, and Carl swung his weapon and, cutting down another monster, shouted to the others to stop the undead. They shouldn't let them in. At that moment, the warriors began to tremble with fear, and the monsters began to scatter them. At that moment, one of the guys fell to the ground while a huge ghoul walked towards him and swung its weapon. But at that moment, Carl ran up to him and cut off part of the monster's head. He looked at the warrior and shouted, is he okay? He rose to his feet and shouted, Captain. He told the others to hold on just a little longer. Just a little longer. He blocked another attack from the monster and added, this is the place where they were born and lived their entire lives. They must protect the castle. At that moment, he clenched his teeth and thought, why now? The next second, his sword broke in two, and the monster in front of him swung its attack and screamed loudly. The captain closed his eyes and frowning thought, damn. If this is how it ends. But at that moment, the weapon stopped above his head, and he turned sharply. That sound. The next second, the monster clutched its head, screaming loudly and dropping its weapon. The undead began to blaze and burn while a bright light emanated from the tower. Carl then looked at this and smiling said, the frame bell, it's fixed. At that moment, a worker in the control room spat out the drink and shouted in surprise. Is this a joke? Did he really do it? He pointed at the monitor and looking at Tae-sik shouted, what the hell is this? Did the update really fail? Then Tae-sik rested his head on his hand and said that this guy hadn't slept since the countdown to the update began. He was surprised a whole week. Day 5, he immediately went to the forge and castle territory. He immediately gathered the city workers and began repairing the frame bell. Then MC began writing down the plan while Bell stood nearby. He said that they needed to smelt everything into raw materials. More precisely, they would extract holy power. While he was drawing up the plans, he tasked Bell with leading the workers and supplying the battlefield. Then the system announced that the creation of a custom divine item was beginning. He said that he would then use his skill to maximize its effectiveness against the undead and evil forces and add properties that deal direct damage. He sighed loudly and then ordered the workers to turn up the heat. He thought with a single will to protect the territory of Castle. At that moment, the workers were smelting the metal, and one of them shouted that he said that the metal must be melted thoroughly. The protagonist thought if everyone worked as one. The workers shouted, no impurities. They must all focus. They must do everything to protect everyone at home. He thought that it would be filled with even more holy power. After that, Day 4, Bell watched as the protagonist smashed the mold into which the bell was poured. On the third day, the workers were resting. And on the last day, Belle suddenly opened her eyes and rubbing them, asked in surprise when she fell asleep. Then she looked around and noticed the protagonist finishing the bell. She thought, unbelievable. He'd been working on that bell for days without sleep. At that moment, a system window appeared in front of her saying, "The apprentice title shines." She witnessed a master blacksmith at work. She cried out in confusion. Master blacksmith? This guy? The system reported that her advanced blacksmithing proficiency had increased by 20%. Then the protagonist turned around and smiling said, "It must have been quite noisy, but she slept like a log." She clenched her fists and cried out, "She hasn't slept this long." He looked at her in surprise, then placed his hand on the bell and said they were almost finished, so she should wait a little longer. Then she looked down and asked, "Can I ask you something?" He was that blacksmith, right? He looked at her in surprise, then smiled, and looking at the bell, replied that it was true. The next second, the bell began to shine, and Belle looked at it with admiration and said, "Wow." To say it's beautiful is an understatement. It's simply magnificent. At that moment, a system window appeared saying the second Hunsu bell. Unique. Infinite durability, special abilities, purify undead, blessing against undead enemies, a recreated artifact that was thought beyond repair. Belle looked at the protagonist and asked, "Recreated? Why had he become stronger?" She thought she had never seen anyone do something like this. Then she called the protagonist and suddenly grabbed his hands. She looked at him with admiration and offered to be with her from this day on. He was surprised. "What? Wait, is this a confession?" She shouted. "And what does he think?" Day X. The protagonist suddenly ran up to the bell and struck it. A powerful sound echoed around, and the undead began to burn in flames. Then the system reported that he had created a new bell and destroyed the undead. Now he could cancel the update and create a new story. The MC smiled and said they did it. He thought, thank goodness he had made it. The next second, he clenched his teeth and felt pain. The system reported that extreme fatigue was setting in. He was exhausted. After that, he abruptly fell to the ground, and Belle ran up to him, worried, and started calling. She screamed, "Hunsu, is he okay?" The system reported that the frame bell repair quest was complete. Then Belle lifted the protagonist, holding his head, and the system reported that the rewards had been changed. Meanwhile, discussions began on the forums. Hey, do they know that blacksmith, Hunsu? What the hell, nerd? Lol. Really, LOL. Why did the castle territory update fail? Yes. He knows. This is the one who made Hansu's first signature sword? Oh, so this is that Hansu? Wow. So it was he who fixed the frame bell? The number of subscribers began to grow. After some time, the protagonist woke up from a bright light. He covered his face with his hand and shouted, "Why is it so damn noisy?" Then a system window appeared in front of him, which said, Hansu's Forge. Subscribers, 101,655. He shouted in surprise, "How many?" He abruptly sat up in bed and widened his eyes in surprise, looking at the system window. He asked, "Is this even real?" He thought, good thing he engraved Hunsu on the bell. Now everyone who visits the Kasil territory will see this bell. And then he heard a voice behind the door. "Mr. Hunsu, can I come in?" Carl smiled and said, "The savior of their territory has woken up. He came at the Lord's behest to present the reward for creating the bell, 330,000 gold. With these words, he threw down the bag, and the system reported that he had received 330,000 gold. MC thought in surprise, 330 million? With that kind of money, he could even contact that person. After this, Render entered the room and said that the savior was worthy of a reward of such a level. He placed an open chest in front of the protagonist and said that it was a gift personally from the Lord. The protagonist looked at the contents in surprise, and the system reported that he had received the legendary mineral, orichalcum. Then he looked at the captain and said that he was grateful. In response, he extended his hand and said that it was they who should thank him. He placed his hand on his chest and said, unlike the others, he did not abandon their lands and protected them. He thanked him from the bottom of his heart. With these words, he bowed, and MC smiled looking at him and thought that he sensed his sincerity. He said he just did what he had to. He thought the despair of the people in Ares was no different from despair in the real world. Then he added, and he apologizes, but he needs to go back to where he comes from for a while. Carl replied, of course. Then the protagonist teleported and thought, come on. Time to return to his forge. Then the system reported, Hyun Soo logged out. Carl, smiling, looked ahead and said, strangers can be strange. The next day in Gyeongju, Hyuk-soo looked at the incoming message, which said, Mr. Hyun-soo transferred 330 million won. He said that he really did it. The real estate investor smiled and said, that's amazing, Han-soo. A year ago, the protagonist left a signature and Hak-soo, taking the document, said a total of 330 million won. He heard there was a big fire. The protagonist replied, right, that's it. Then Hyuk-soo rose from the table and said, still, this should be enough to pay the hospital bills, so he should hang in there. It's time for him to go. After that, the MC asked if he could buy the forge back. He looked at him in surprise and asked, what again? The protagonist's hands trembled, and he said, if he could somehow save up the money, would he sell the forge back to him? He replied that buying back a burned-out forge would be like throwing money away. If he needed a forge, he'd better buy a new one. But the protagonist said, no, it had to be their forge. Tears streamed down his face, and he added that this place held memories of his father. Then the real estate investor frowned, looked at him, and thought, for a property like this, even if you work yourself to the bone. Then he said, 1 year. He was giving him exactly 1 year. But he must remember, as soon as a year passes, he will sell it to the first buyer. Then the MC looked after him and bowing sharply, shouted that he was very grateful to him. He replied that he would wait for a call. In the present tense, the protagonist looked at him and said that, frankly, he knew he was asking the impossible. A year was only an approximate time frame. Such a property could be sold at any moment, but he really kept his promise. If he doesn't mind, may I ask why he is so kind to him? After that, Hyuk-soo put his hand on his shoulder and said that he was the first one to ask for a buyback after the sale. He just wanted to support such a person. After that, the MC bowed and shouted that he was grateful to him, and he replied that it was not worth it. He should thank him for keeping his word. Then the protagonist closed his eyes and thought that he did not have to give up the forge. He should thank him. Then he added, by the way, does he by any chance know a game called Ares? He looked at him and then laughed and said, of course, who hasn't heard about that by now? And the protagonist awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said, exactly. He's actually a blacksmith in Ares. Hushuef folded his arms and asked, really? It's the perfect job for him. And the protagonist said, so as a gift, he wants to forge an artifact for him. He said, oh, then can he make him something to order? Does it matter what the effect, type, or level? MC smiled and said, of course. He will do whatever he wants for him. After a while, the protagonist entered the pub and started looking around and then noticed Belle, who was sitting at a table and waving at him, said this way. He sat down at the table opposite her. She smiled looking at him and noted that they first saw each other since the incident with the undead. He answered, yes. That's right. And she asked, it's not that easy to find him. Did he know? In response, he awkwardly apologized. She laughed and said she was just joking. And then she said she would introduce herself properly. She was Golden Shield's chief strategist, the one who made Golden Shield what it is today. And that day she was sure of one thing, that one day he, Han-soo, would become one of the best players, so she would get straight to the point. When he eventually created a guild, she wanted to be the first member. With that, she extended her hand forward, and the protagonist asked, hadn't she just recently called him a cheater? In response, she awkwardly apologized and said, but, honestly, anyone would have made a mistake in that situation. That's not the point right now. Then the protagonist shook her hand and said that he was just teasing her. He was also happy to work with her, but first, the next second, Belle abruptly stood up and shouted, what did he say? He's going to meet the Sword King of Barad, one of the 10 legends? The protagonist tasted the dish and replied, that's right. He's participating in the Goyard tournament. He'd heard that Barad himself would present the prize to the winner. She put her hand to her head and lowering her head said, that's true. But rising stars from all over the world come to this tournament. It's no joke. He looked at her and said, that's exactly why he should win. She looked at him and shouted indignantly. How can he say that so calmly? Then he told her not to worry. He smiled and added that he would simply strive for the top using his strengths. She looked at him in surprise, and then he asked, by the way, isn't she going to eat? To which she replied that she didn't want to. The day of the tournament, Goyard, the host riding a dragon, flew over the stadium and then shouted, welcome to the Goyard tournament. Bakel shouted. The tournament will begin as soon as he steps off the stage, and soon they will all face monsters. Then he frowned, looking down and added, they may not be able to see him, but his highness is watching over them, so they must behave with dignity. May good fortune be with them. At that moment, the players in the arena began to rejoice, and the system announced that the tournament had begun. The next second, the ground beneath the players trembled, and they turned around in fear, noticing how a huge stone monster erupted from the ground. A system window appeared in front of them, telling them that they must survive the golem's onslaught. The time limit was 1 hour. At that moment, one of the guys shouted, he must show himself. The big guy. The guy next to him shouted that he knew the first opponent would be a golem. Then they ran to the attack and shouted, forward. The system announced the first trial of the tournament. Whoever defeats the stone golem will receive a reward. A level 109 stone golem stood before the players. It raised its head, growling loudly. At that moment, a swordsman rushed forward and said in fear, wait, was the golem always this high a level? The guy next to him asked, are you scared? The first round should be easy. But before he could finish speaking, a huge stone fist flew at his body, and the system reported that his health had reached 0%. He would be forcibly disconnected from the system. At that moment, the player clenched his teeth and shouted, hey, is he okay? But the next second, the monster crushed him too. People around him screamed, they have to dodge. The system reported that his health had reached 0%. He would be forcibly disconnected from the system. Then the mage shouted in fear, what? This is completely different from what they were told. Then the warrior covered himself with a shield and asked, how are they supposed to defeat this creature? Meanwhile, Beagle ran down the corridor and thought, damn it, this tournament is a complete failure. A stone golem from a high-level tournament had gotten here by mistake. He ran past a worker and shouted that now was not the time for greetings. He thought that if this continued, all the outsiders in the tournament would be killed. He ran to the doors where guards stood, shouting that they must let him in. He urgently needed to see His Highness. They looked at him in surprise and asked, Lord Beckel? But His Highness had not yet given permission. The next second, Beckel abruptly opened the door and shouted, His Highness, they must stop the tournament immediately. But Barad, sitting on his throne, rested his hand on his fist and said, request denied. He was surprised. What? But he asked. He still didn't understand what was going on. He looked at the magic ball and told him to watch this warrior closely. At that moment, MC fired an arrow, which only grazed a small part of the golem's head. The system reported Hyunsu's third creation, return. The protagonist grabbed the arrow, and the system reported that it was returning to the user, an orichalcum's short arrow. At that moment, those watching were surprised. Did that arrow just return? A boomerang arrow? Then the protagonist took aim again and thought, so that's it. A reward from castle territory. Just think, it's legendary orichalcum. Excellent stats as he expected. He then fired another arrow and thought he'd hit the target. And then one of the players dodged the arrow and shouted, hey, be careful. Unless he wants to die, of course. In response, the protagonist apologized. Then the golem raised its head, and the system reported that the stone golem had been stunned for 4 seconds. The protagonist stood in front of it and shouted, the stone golem is stunned. The remaining players rushed to attack, shouting that this was their chance. Attack. They struck from different directions, and then the golem raised its leg to take a step. The players began to scatter and shout, watch out. The next second, one of them shouted, we need to hold on just a little longer. It's over. Hey. He has to run. At that moment, a huge stone fist was approaching the protagonist, and the other players began to dodge. But the protagonist shouted, change weapons. He was in the smoke that cleared around him, and he said, it's not over yet. He blocked the monster's attack, holding his sword in front of its fist. Then he prepared for another attack, but suddenly his sword shattered, sending him flying far back. At that moment, Baikal said, Your Highness, they must stop the tournament immediately. This participant also seemed to be at his limit, but Barad closed his eyes and then, perplexed, looked into the magic ball and saw part of the sword pierce the golem. After that, the system reported that the god's emergency creation was complete. The Damascus blade could cut stone. He defeated the stone golem. The god's emergency creation and the Damascus blade disappeared. He leveled up. The MC looked at the system windows that appeared and said in surprise, wow. He leveled up 14 at once. Then a player approached him and said, it can't be. He really won. The protagonist looked at him and asked, weren't they supposed to defeat him? He shouted, how could they defeat him with such a level difference? They were told to survive. Then he raised 3 fingers and added, the trial itself consists of 3 stages, so the balance has already been upset. He wasn't released so they could defeat him. In response, the protagonist smiled awkwardly and scratching the back of his head said, "I see." Then he said, "By the way, why does he feel so bad?" The next second, his eyes began to close again, and he fell to the ground. The players gathered around him were surprised. What? Did he lose consciousness? It doesn't look like he was kicked out of the system. Are they just going to leave him? What about the tournament? Is it still going on? By the way, how many times did that player change weapons? He thought he was a jack of all trades, but he turned out to be a master of weapons. This is insane. He would kill for any of his weapons. The next second, Beckel returned to the arena and shouted, "Attention to all participants. Due to an error by the organizers, the martial arts tournament is suspended. They must disperse." Sometime later, a video of the main character lying on the ground was posted online. And in the comments, everyone was writing, "Wow, that's terrible. Did he actually take down a stone golem all by himself? They need to give information on that bow, please. Isn't the arrow cooler than the bow itself?" Exactly. That guy passed out and dropped something. What kind of arrow is that? It looks cool. Guys, they should look at the inscription. What is it? He was the one who recently created the bell in the lands of Castle. That's him. Really? That's crazy. That guy is a blacksmith? No. How can a blacksmith be so strong? Yeah. That looks like a hoax. Wow. His gear is just outrageous. At that moment, the game support team was receiving messages asking why the Goyard martial arts tournament had been suspended. The support worker replied that they apologize, client. It's difficult for them to comment on a decision made by Ares' free will. The player asked, "So what? A level 100 plus golem just suddenly appeared. Were they all supposed to die?" The worker replied that this was also an internal matter for the Goyard kingdom, so they couldn't give an answer. He asked what could he even tell him. In response, the support worker apologized. And then Soyeon smiled awkwardly, and then slamming her head on the table said, "Team leader, they have a big problem." Taesik was typing at the time and asked, "What else?" He was busy right now. She swiveled in her chair and said that the Goyard martial arts tournament had been suspended. He said he knew it would happen, but so be it. She shouted that it wasn't that.
Barag sumuned hansu.
Tae-Siwok looked at her in confusion and spitting out his drink shouted, "What? It would take time for them to sort out the tournament and everything else. Had they met yet?" She replied, "Yes." Hansu is currently heading to the reception hall. After that, Tae-Siwok covered his face with his hand and said they were finished. It looked like another sleepless night awaited him. So Yun desperately said that she wanted to go home. Then Tae-Siwok stood up and said that this player was so otherworldly that he didn't understand him. She agreed with him. What would happen if Hyun-Soo fulfilled Barrett's request and reached the maximum affinity level? What did he think? He replied that he would master the sword art of the King of Swords and become the strongest blacksmith. Then he folded his arms and added, "Of course, it won't be easy. Everything depends on Barrett's free will." So Yun said she had a feeling he would succeed. These are just silly worries, right? He told her not to say such mean things. The next day, MC was walking down the castle corridor and thought that he would meet Barrett sooner than he thought. Then he knelt before the throne and Barrett told him to listen. "Stranger, usually the award is presented in front of everyone, but he asked to understand that they skipped the procedure due to an unforeseen incident. Everyone acknowledges his magnificent battle yesterday. Warrior, he must accept this." He walked forward and said that he awards him a reward of 13,000 gold. The next second, the protagonist said, "His Majesty." He heard that he was looking for him. He frowned and asked, "What?" And then the protagonist began to climb the stairs. The guards shouted, "Ugh, such insolence. No matter how rare a warrior he is, this cannot be tolerated. How dare he interrupt His Majesty?" As if His Majesty would be looking for someone like him. Then the protagonist placed his hand on his chest and said, "Blacksmith Hyunsu, it is he." The guard shouted, "Insolence. How dare he speak to His Majesty like that? His Majesty, he begs your pardon. He will throw this man out immediately." Then Barrett raised his hand and ordered them to stop. He extended his hand forward and declared that he was the guest he had been waiting for. The protagonist then bowed and greeted him, "His Highness Barrett." He told him not to rush. The protagonist folded his arms across his chest and said that the journey here had not been easy. The Sword King replied he knows why he called him. He answered affirmatively to entrust him with forging a sword, didn't he? He smiled and said that was correct. Even the kingdom's best blacksmith, even the master of the sword tower couldn't handle this order, and yet he wants to know why he can trust him. The next second, he released a powerful energy, and the protagonist said that he came here believing only in his own skill. Then Barad laughed loudly and shouted, "How brave! Good." And Bekele said in surprise, "Your Majesty." And he told them to bring what he had prepared. His subordinate replied, "Yes." He said that he would count on his confidence. After that, the subordinate approached the protagonist with an open chest. A system window appeared in front of him stating that 100-year-old cold steel is a special or that has absorbed cold for 100 years. It has fire resistance and ice properties. MC's mouth dropped open in surprise and thought, this mineral is straight out of a martial arts novel. Then Hansu said he needed a sword of epic rank or higher, and if he succeeded, he would give him whatever he desired. But if he disappointed him, he would never set foot in the Goyard kingdom again. The next second, the protagonist held a chest in his hands. He looked at the system window that appeared, which stated, Quest, Royal Commission, Rank S, Condition, Recognition of the King, Reward, any wish granted by Barad, Failure, Exile from the Goyard Kingdom.
Description.
The Sword King Barad of the Goyard Kingdom has commissioned him to forge a sword. He thought a chance to ask Barad for anything. Then he smiled and said that he definitely wouldn't let him down. He thought he would definitely succeed. After some time, he began to work in the forge and looking away, thought he felt a stare boring into his back. Behind him, leaning her back against the wall, stood the vice-captain of the Goyard Kingdom's Knights, Bella, level 301. He sighed and thought, even though he was an outsider, it was perfectly natural to have someone oversee him so openly. He shook his head and thought it would be strange if they trusted him right away. Then Bella told him to pretend she wasn't there. He should focus on work. Yes. He smiled awkwardly and asked, was it that obvious? She answered in the affirmative, then frowned and thought, who did he think he was? His Majesty had given him one last chance. Hadn't he? Let him just try to fail. Then MC wiped his sweat and thought about the pressure. Then he noticed a system window appear which said doorbell. He looked surprised, then turned around and scratching his head said, I think something happened in the real world. Can he step outside for a minute? Bella nodded in response. And a few seconds later, the protagonist emerged from the capsule, approached the door and said she could come in. The landlady stood at the threshold and said, Oh, Hyun-soo. He's home. He greeted her and thought, Landlady? He asked what brought her here. She said they'd decided to sell the house. Her husband had been unemployed for a long time, so they needed to figure things out somehow. He asked her not to apologize. He should be the one apologizing after all. She'd been renting him a room cheaper than everyone else, and he'd even missed a few payments. When did he need to move out? She replied that he needed to move out within 2 weeks. She was already embarrassed to look him in the eye. Hyun-soo. He bowed and asked her not to say that. He truly was happy here. Then he turned around and said, 2 weeks. He really made good money at Ares, but the hospital bills were in the tens of millions. The buyout of the almost burned-out forge cost 330 million won, and he still hadn't gotten around to treating his burns. He grabbed his head and asked, where should he go now? Then he was surprised to notice his phone ringing and asked, Belle? He answered and asked, hello. She asked, what was he doing? She had a great idea for a mission. That's why she was calling. In response, he asked, can he call back? His head was busy with other things right now. She asked, did something happen? He replied, the bar admission is important, but he suddenly needs to move out within 2 weeks. She said, Hansu. He said it's certainly urgent, but before he could finish speaking, she screamed loudly. Does he even understand how important this mission is? He was surprised. What? And she said that she expects 2 main results from this quest. He asked, 2 results? She answered, yes. Everyone is wondering if the Goyard tournament champion and the blacksmith Hansu are the same person or not. She must imagine that he is in hiding for now, but then he will show up and announce the creation of a guild. And one more thing, he received an order for a sword from Barad, one of the most influential characters in Ares. Alone, he can only imagine Barad demonstrating a new sword with Hansu's engraving. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise, and then she added, at that moment his value will skyrocket. She said that she would support him. Then he clenched his fist and thanked her. She helped him come to his senses. He will do everything in his power. He clenched his fist and she said, go. After that, he returned to the forge. When suddenly Bella grabbed his hand and shouted, hey, why did he only come back now? He wondered what happened. She said, His Majesty Barad is trapped in the dragon's lair. The protagonist was perplexed. His Majesty Barad is trapped, and then he thoughtfully asked, where exactly? She put her hand to her head and asked. He was surprised, not even knowing where it was. Then she sighed and added, there is no time, so she will explain everything quickly. The Lair of Flame is a general name for the lands where fire monsters live, and among them is the dungeon of the Ifrit, from which no one has ever returned alive except His Majesty Barad. The protagonist asked why he needed to go again to the dungeon he had already been, and without taking the sword he ordered from him, she answered, it was because the target of his revenge was there. He asked, the target of his revenge? At that moment, in the Lair of Flame, Barad shielded himself from the stream of fire behind a stone wall and clenching his teeth thought, almost there. Now all that remained was to pass through these gates. But then again, even this sword isn't enough. With these words, he looked at the melted sword, then tossed it aside and thought, at least his men were able to retreat safely. Even if reinforcements arrived, it would take at least 3 days. Then he leaned his head against the wall and said, perhaps it was worth waiting for that stranger to finish the sword. He thought, if only his son, Ban, were still alive. Hansu, he would now be about the same age as this young man. At that moment, he began to remember his son. The moment when he said, Father. Then he crouched down next to him and shouted, Ban, why did you come here without saying a word? He replied that he thought that if he cleared this dungeon, he would finally become a son he would be proud of. But it seemed he was too weak. He apologized. But Barad, with tears in his eyes, shouted at him not to apologize. Ban, he must hold on. He said, I'm so sorry, father, and more. Barad grabbed his face and asked Ban he must stay with him. He called his son again and again, holding him close. In the present, he grabbed the hilt of his sword and thought it was worth waiting for the stranger to finish the sword, but he wouldn't let the Ifrit slip away. He'd been waiting for it to appear for years. He clenched his teeth and thought, I must catch it. Then he walked forward. Meanwhile, Bella said, since the prince died, His Majesty has tried everything to catch the Ifrit. But the Ifrit has never shown itself so easily. This could be the Lord's last chance. Frankly, it's hard to trust a stranger like him, but if His Highness trusted him, then there must be a reason. With these words, she looked away, then bowed and cried out like a knight of the Gore Kingdom. Please, he must save His Majesty. The next second, a system window appeared in front of the protagonist stating an urgent quest, a sword that will save the king. Rank S requirement, accept requests. Reward, too dangerous to disclose. Penalty for failure, Barad's death.
Description.
The Sword King, Barad, is locked in the lair of the Ifrit. He must forge a blade capable of saving him. MC thought he hadn't expected Barad to go through so much. That day, he too nearly lost everything he had in the fire. If he, like Barad, had lost his family, would he be able to continue forward after that? Then he nodded and bowing, said he would do everything in his power. After that, he began to forge the weapon. After a while, he looked at the tip of the sword and thought, they say the heat of the Ifrit can melt even unique weapons. So he needed to forge a weapon of a higher class than unique and focus on flame protection. He placed his hand on the glowing sword, then continued to strike it with his hammer, and the system reported that his understanding of the century-old cold iron had deepened. He struck a few more blows, and the system reported that the blacksmith's soul skill had activated. While forging this blade, he immersed himself in the process more deeply than ever before. His passion and determination allowed him to focus completely. The first legendary sword, Hinsu, had been forged. The next second, Bella ran into the room and shouted, "Is it ready?" The protagonist held a glowing sword in his hands, then looked at her and said that they must go save His Majesty, Barad. Meanwhile, the King of Swords spat out a clot of blood. A powerful explosion thundered, and he flew into the wall, covering it with cracks. Then he frowned and said that today they would end everything. Opposite him stood the boss of the Lair of Flame, a level 409 Ifrit. He shouted, "Ifrit." Then he pushed off the ground and jumping up, shouted that he had no idea how long he had waited for this. With these words, he swung the remains of his weapon and struck flying past the monster. But the next second, the wound on the Ifrit's body was covered with tons of flame, and then he pointed the fiery weapon at the King of Swords. He began to run in the opposite direction, and streams of fire snatched his weapon, melting it completely. He thought, a sword? Then the Ifrit concentrated fire in his hands and then swung the weapon, spreading fire around. And then Barad frowned from the streams of fire and cried out loudly. In response, the Ifrit began to laugh and Barad began to rise to his feet and said, "Damn, This is still a failure. The next second, he looked ahead in surprise. 2 swords were stuck into the ground next to him, one fire and the other ice. He looked to the side in confusion, noticing a wall of ice. MC was breathing heavily, and Bella shouted, "His Majesty, he must use the sword." The next second, Barad grabbed the weapon and a system window appeared in front of him, which said Barad's personal sword, Hansu, legendary. Special abilities plus 343 fire resistance, plus 194% ice damage, plus 397% ice damage against fire monsters. Active skill, Ice Flower.
Description.
Hansu's first legendary work custom made for King Barad. The protagonist smiled and told him to try it. The next second, the King of Swords swung his weapon and sent an ice flower forward. Ice spread around, and the Ifrit began to scream loudly. Then Barad began to circle around it from the wall and swinging to strike shouted, "It's over." He swung his sword, cutting the monster's body in 2. The others watched what was happening, and then the system reported that he had defeated the boss. Barad said, "Finally, they did it." Then Bella looked ahead in surprise, noticing that the fire began to burn stronger. An MC shouted in surprise, "What's going on?" She shouted, "Some monsters self-destruct before they die." At that moment, Barad began to be covered in fire, and Bella, covering herself with her hands, shouted, "Your Majesty, he must leave quickly. It's dangerous here." But he shouted for her to stay put. "That's an order." He took a medallion from his armor and said he wanted to finish this now. Then he opened the medallion, looking at a photograph of his son, and Bella worriedly thought that she needed to save His Majesty. She could help, but His Majesty ordered her not to enter. What should she do? With a trembling hand, she reached for her sword and then cried out in surprise, "Stranger!" But the protagonist walked forward and then smiled. He turned and said that he would go and save His Majesty. The system reported an emergency divine creation, creating armor with fire resistance. He walked forward, wiping sweat from his face, and then noticing Barad cried out, "Your Highness." He told him to leave Stranger. He had already done more than was required. MC came closer and said that he could not. He came to escort him, His Majesty, but he continued to kneel and said that he would not leave. The protagonist asked if it was because of the necklace's owner. He replied that it was true. It was because of him that his son had left this world. How could he live after that? And at that moment, MC frowned and asked if he thought the necklace's owner would be happy about, and Barad was indignant. How dare he? He wouldn't understand. No one would understand. He grabbed the protagonist by the clothes and shouted the bitterness of losing a child through his own fault. How dare he even talk about that? And the protagonist frowned and said, yes. He would never know this pain, but he could say this. He too almost lost someone close to him. His father was in a coma. Every day, prayed for him to open his eyes, but now he was just glad he was alive in any condition. He thought his son would feel the same. At these words, Barad let him go, and then the protagonist leaned on his shoulder and asked him to let his son go. He said, Ban. He's asking for forgiveness. He's apologizing.
Bon.
A tear rolled down his face, and he added his stupid father was wrong. And then the protagonist put his hand on his shoulder and said that he must live, His Majesty. He looked into his eyes and asked, shouldn't he be a father his son could be proud of? He replied that he was right. He shouldn't be a father anyone should be ashamed of. Then he looked up, smiled, and said that they should go. After that, he put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder, and they approached Bella. She ran towards them and shouted, Stranger, His Majesty is in danger, and he said that His Majesty is fine. The next second, the system reported that his health was depleted, forced log out. He smiled and said that he would be back soon. And at that moment, Bella ran up to the King of Swords and held his hand. He said, Hansu, this guy saved him. Then he fell to the ground, and Bella shouted, Your Majesty, he must come to his senses. Your Majesty. After a while, the system reported that due to a forced exit, his level had been lowered by 1. A tear streamed down the protagonist's face, and he thought, he will move on, father. Falling asleep, Barad found himself on a grassy cliff, at the edge of which stood a young man. Turning around, the young man called him father with a smile, and his eyes widened in surprise. It was Ban. He asked in shock, is it really him, his son? Ban ran up to him and said that he had come to say goodbye. Barad immediately grabbed his hand and worriedly asked, what is he talking about? Unwillingly, he burst into tears, and his son said that as that guy, Hansu, had said, he wanted him to be happy. so let him live for himself now. Watching his body dissolve in the sunlight, Burad tearfully shouted his name several times trying to reach him and then woke up. Seeing him rise, the servants immediately rushed to him and worriedly said that he had been unconscious for 3 days. Is he okay? Burad said that Bon had come to say goodbye. He looked at his shaking hand and said that it was that guy. He needed to see Hansu. And immediately, when the time for the meeting approached, he came to the reception room and waited. And finally, Hansu was brought in. He immediately knelt before the king in greeting, and the king asked him to stand up with a smile. MC asked how he was feeling, and he told him that he was fine. Let him come and sit opposite him. He called him because he wanted to ask him something. He waited until Hansu sat down and said that he knew very well that outsiders were immortal creatures who were reborn even after death, but that didn't mean they weren't afraid of death. Why did he risk his life to save him? He answered him that there were 2 reasons. First, he carried burdens similar to his, and he hoped that he would continue to live. Barad touched his chest thinking about this, and asked what the second reason was. He awkwardly replied that he was confident that His Majesty would reward him generously. The king looked at him slightly surprised, then smirked and remarked that this was quite presumptuous. MC smiled awkwardly, and Barad said that he was right. He was going to reward him generously anyway. He handed him a scroll and said that this was payment for the sword he forged. When Hansu revealed it, the system informed him that he received 1 million gold, which greatly surprised him. Seeing his reaction, the king said that this sword saved his life. Isn't it worth the price? MC immediately stood up and bowed to him 90 degrees, thanking him, and he sternly ordered him to sit back down. As he said, from now on, he will try to live his life to the fullest so that he will not be ashamed when he meets Ban in the afterlife, and he hopes he will do the same. Let him live for his father who will wake up one day. And also, could he visit him from time to time? He was interested in hearing about his life and the people he would meet. He agreed and said that he would also like to hear His Majesty's stories. The king extended his hand and asked, since he had given him great insight, could he call him friend? Because of this, Hansi was surprised. The system informed him that his friendship level with Barad had reached the maximum. The blessing of a friend was now with him. MC shook his hand without further thought because becoming a friend of an NPC like Barad was an honor for him. Barad stood up and said that, in honor of friendship, he wanted to pass on his swordsmanship to him. Hearing this, the knight commander, Benson, indignantly called out to him and asked, is he going to pass this on to an outsider? Didn't he appoint Lord Rod as his successor and begin his training? One must be worthy to adopt his art. To inherit his swordsmanship requires qualifications. The king waved his hand and said he wasn't going to teach just anyone, then glanced at Hansu, who saw a system window appear with a quest to obtain the S-rank skill, the swordsmanship of the King of Swords. This quest is only available to those who received Barad's offer. Failure will result in a penalty, a decrease in his friendship level with Barad. Not everyone can master the swordsmanship. He needs to land at least 3 successful hits on the knight commander, Benson. Barad told him with a smile that the knight commander would test his abilities. Having received 2 days of rest, the first thing MC did after logging out was spend the reward to pay his hospital bills. Then he found a new place to live and thanked the landlady who forgave him the rent. After all this, he called Jehun and invited him to dinner, and Jehun asked if he wanted to buy him beer from the convenience store again. But when Hansu took him to a restaurant and ordered beef, he was very impressed. Watching the meat fry, he asked with anticipation, is this really Korean beef? He confirmed it, and Jehun immediately began eating, saying that now he'd seen it all. Hansu was treating him to Korean beef. It was simply incredible. His friend said that he'd simply done so much for him, so he wanted to treat him to something decent. His words made Jehun uneasy, and seeing him take out some kind of package from under the table, he asked, what is this? The MC said with a smile that it was a gift for him. He unpacked it, slightly confused, and inside were super fashionable branded shoes. He exclaimed in shock, where did he get the money for this? He was really giving this to him? The MC said that he'd wanted them for a long time. It was his gift, and the money for the capsule he gave him, he had already transferred to his account. The guy was surprised when he managed to do this and happily thanked him for such a gift, and he smiled and mentally said that it was all thanks to him. His life was finally starting to change. He said that, actually, he should be thanking him. The guy didn't understand what he was talking about, and then he shoved a piece of beef into his mouth and told him to just shut up and eat. When Hunsu returned to the game, he began to complete the task. The king, the knight commander, his deputy, and Hunsu gathered in the arena. Bella announced the start of the fight, and Benson told Hunsu to get his weapon out. He would not give in just because he was His Majesty's friend. MC took a stone out of his bag and said with a smile that the feeling was mutual. He was looking forward to the duel. Suddenly, the stone shone brightly, blinding the knight for a moment, and then it turned into a sword. Benson was slightly surprised. He thought something incredible would appear, but it was just an ordinary sword. He prepared himself and said that this was stupid, and he thinks he can match the knight's skill with some piece of iron. He lunged forward and struck a blow, which MC blocked, but it caused cracks to appear on his sword. Benson noticed this and asked what he was thinking, creating such a flimsy sword. But the unexpected happened. The sword suddenly shattered into many fragments, and they began to circle near the knight at high speed, striking. When it was all over and the fragments fell, he looked at them in confusion, and Hunsu asked, he only had to strike, right? The total number of successful attacks is only 59. There was no rule that prohibited it, right? The knight's mouth dropped open in surprise. He never would have thought that he could lose like this. After that, he frowned slightly and asked who he really was. He took out a hammer and showed it to him, saying that he was the god of blacksmithing. Since he looked too majestic with this hammer, Benson was delighted, and he bowed his head to him, saying that it was an honor for him to meet the god of blacksmithing. Let him carry the art of the sword to the world and beyond. MC became embarrassed and asked him to stop since it was all too much pressure on him, and some time passed. He walked along the corridors of the palace, bowing his head in annoyance. He really prepared for the stool. Thanks to it, he was able to master his art, and his skill also improved. But what next? Because of his low level, he was able to study only 3 chapters and not all. The first chapter is the Aria of Beasts. Chapter 2 is the Sword of Raging Waves. Chapter 3 is the Cry of the Sword. They promised that they would teach him the remaining chapters as soon as he achieved the necessary mastery. He approached the king's office. The servants greeted him and allowed him to enter. Barrett greeted him, and he said that he came to discuss something and needed his advice. The 100-year-old cold iron he used to create his sword, he needed it. The king tapped his finger on the table in confusion and said he would gladly give it to his friend. But, unfortunately, that ingot was the last one. Hunsu was very surprised by this news and immediately became despondent because it would take a week and a lot of effort. The king smiled and told him not to despair. Cold iron could be mined in the frost mine. Why shouldn't he mine it himself? He asked. Could he really do that? The king called out to Bella and said that she would go to the frost mine with Hunsu. She objected since she had to stay by his side, and he said that it would be a good experience for her too. She had no choice but to agree. She couldn't object to the king. Soon after, the king made an announcement. With this sword, he announced the conquest of the first tomb to the great joy of the spectators. They also noticed his sword. The icy aura of this weapon could be felt even from a distance. The blade was inscribed with the word Hyun, a name they were all already familiar with. It was written on the armor of the winners of the recent tournament. It seems the blacksmith Hyun is now in the Goddard Kingdom. Nothing is known about this blacksmith at all. Neither his age, level, nor gender have been revealed. After reading this, Belle thought it was good that they managed to spread the rumor that Hyun-soo and the blacksmith are different people. The comments also mentioned that there are rumors that he is over 40 and fat, which is quite possible since he doesn't show himself in public. Ji-hoon laughed at this, and someone in the commentary said that he doesn't care. He will still subscribe. Someday he will start accepting orders from players. Hunsi's popularity quickly rose thanks to the sword in Barrett's hands during his speech. He currently checked the number of subscribers on the Blacksmith forum, and it has grown to 30,000. Everyone is very interested in the blacksmith, Hyun. What will happen if he reveals that he is the winner of the tournament? He glanced at his trembling hand and thought that he should be more careful. He still had a lot of things to do. He should send a message or call someone. He still hasn't thanked that person. Meanwhile, Hushue was sitting at the computer and thought that Barrett had already tried to clear the tomb several times. As expected, it was an inaccessible area for players. He entered the Salamander dungeon many times for a class quest, but all the artifacts had melted, so he didn't have a single chance to pass it. Most unique rank shields simply melt. He had money, but even his unique artifacts wouldn't help here. Where could he find a good master? And then a message from Hyunsu arrived on his phone. He wrote to him to keep his previous promise. Seeing the notification, he immediately became happy. But what promise was he talking about? He remembered their conversation and wondered if it was the artifact they were talking about. Hyun-soo wrote him a new message asking if there were any changes to the properties of the artifacts he requested. He was just about to do it and send it to him. The man frowned slightly and thought that if he could create the artifact he needed right now, it would be nice. He replied that there were no changes. What was his level? Hansu replied that he was level 59, and he noted with annoyance that he was still low. He wrote to him that if it wasn't too much trouble, then let him do it for him. After which, he put the phone aside and thought that be that as it may, the guy was promising so he could count on him. He returned to the computer and, seeing the news about the buried sword, thought maybe he should send an order to the blacksmith hin too. But he heard that he didn't even take orders from high-ranking people, and he certainly wouldn't accept one from someone like him. But he was running out of time for the class transfer quest, so he should at least try. Time passed, and Hinsu and Bella reached the ice mine, the sight of which amazed him. The system notified him that he was the first user to enter the ice mine, and his experience would be doubled for a week. He smiled and thought that he liked the title of being the first to enter, plus it also gave experience. He looked at Bella and asked if she had been here before. She answered without much enthusiasm that this was her first time here too, and he smiled awkwardly, noting that it was a terribly cold and desolate wasteland. They descended into the mine chatting about something, and one of the workers asked how they got here. It was forbidden to enter here without permission. Bella showed him her documents and introduced herself, saying that she entered with the permission of the royal family. At the mention of the royal family, the guy's eyes immediately sparkled with delight. And after examining the document, he exclaimed, "Is this the royal seal?" He had never seen anything like it. He immediately became much friendlier and told Hemsu that his name was Banya, and that he was a miner. He introduced himself to him in response, and he said that he was glad to see a stranger after so long, but he couldn't let just anyone into the mine. MC was slightly confused, asking what he should do then, and Banya, with a wide smile on his face, said that luckily, his father was the foreman. He would take them to him. MC thanked him for his help, and Bella, as always, its sense that remained dissatisfied. They passed 2 caves, in one of which MC saw monsters. Noticing his curiosity, Banya said that it was some kind of dungeon. A long time ago, monsters appeared all over the territory, but 100 years ago, a wizard sealed them in this mine. He asked if what was stuck to those monsters was really that 100-year-old cold steel. The guy confirmed it and said that being greedy would end badly. It was their territory after all beyond the barrier. He might be able to get in, but getting out alive would be difficult. The miners, were upset themselves because that mine most likely had the most or left, but at least they could work in peace knowing that those monsters were locked up, so they had to make do with that. They came to the railroad, and he pointed to the man giving orders, saying it was his father. He called out to him loudly, informing him that they had guests, and then ran off to continue working. Hansu thanked him for his help and headed toward the man with Bella, while Banya quickly hid behind the nearest cart and began watching them, wondering why strangers would venture so far. When the two approached his father, he looked them over and asked, "A royal knight and an outsider." His name was Rek, and he was level 231. He remarked that it was a rather strange combination. What brought them? MC answered that he was looking for N, or that was better than cold steel, even better than any other. Rek asked, "Or that better than cold steel?" He confirmed this and asked if he happened to know of such an ore. The man looked him over and thought that such an ore existed. But why would he tell anyone about it? Especially not to some greedy outsider. If word got out that there was something like that in the ice mine, everything here would definitely descend into chaos. But this outsider had come with the royal family's permission. Is there a way to extract and hide all the ore here? He asked if he had ever mined ore. He shook his head, denying it, and he said that miners usually extract 3 pieces of ore a day. If he can extract 40 pieces in a week, he will share the information with him. After that, a system window popped up in front of Hyunsu with a task. Extract 40 pieces of ore in a week. If the task fails, he will not know about the ore superior to 100-year-old cold steel. Rex smiled and asked, "So he will accept his offer?" MC confidently clenched his fist and asked, "What if he extracts more than 40? He let out a chuckle and said that will not happen. But if suddenly he succeeds, he will extract this ore for him himself. Let him remember that he cannot have the support of his comrades. Su asked, is he promising him this? He promised him without hesitation and said that then they will see each other in a week. After this, Rak turned to the minecart and shouted his son's name loudly, saying that he knew he was there and that he should come out. After this, he grabbed him and dragged him away, asking why he was hanging around there and eavesdropping. Meanwhile, Bella asked Su with displeasure why he had made a promise to the foreman, and he, taking out a pickaxe, answered that, to be honest, he knew he was going into the mine, so he had prepared some things in advance. The ore was better, and he would extract it at any cost. The girl felt uneasy and thought that His Majesty had gotten involved with some strange man. A week passed. Rex sat down on a stone and began to wait for Su and thought that the stranger had told him that he would not leave the mine for a week. It was simply impossible anyway. Noticing movement to the side, he turned his head and saw Su coming out of the mine all dirty and with a smile on his face. He greeted him and noted that at least he now looked like a miner. The time had come, so let him show results. MC pulled a stone from his inventory and threw it on the ground, and the man thought that he hadn't expected this. A stranger was beyond his capabilities, but he jumped to conclusions. After one stone, 100 more jumped out of his inventory, and he was very surprised. With every second, the pile of ore grew. In total, Su mined 200 pieces. Rek pointed him in shock and exclaimed, "Who is he? Could he really be a legendary hunter?" He slung his pickaxe over his shoulder and answered with a smile that it wasn't so. He was just an ordinary blacksmith. He achieved this result thanks to a Damascus sword, which increases cutting power on stone by 170% and reduces durability damage from stone by 70%. This sword can transform into a pickaxe, which is quite convenient and useful. Rex surveyed the entire pile of ore and, composing himself, said that the hand of a blacksmith was immediately apparent. He wanted to apologize for underestimating him. "How about a drink tonight?" MC smiled and shook his hand, saying he'd be happy to have a drink with him and asked if he could invite Bella too. The man didn't object, and when evening came, they gathered at the tavern, and Bella immediately began drinking. Banya asked why she was drinking so much alone. Su agreed and suggested they chat instead, but she declined, saying she preferred it that way. Banya was upset about this, and then a man came up to their table and patted Su on the back asking if he really managed to mine 200 pieces of ore. He confirmed it, and he asked what about cold iron. How much of that did he manage to mine? He answered that he mined about 20 pieces of iron, and he was surprised. He also heard that he had a special pickaxe. Maybe he could show it to him? MC took it out of his inventory and told them that it was a Damascus pickaxe, a tool created exclusively for mining ore. This pickaxe increases mining efficiency by over 200%, and thanks to this, he completed the quest. And it can also be turned into a sword, which will make it better at chopping stone, so it's a very useful thing. Bella, meanwhile, thought that he really was a blacksmith. He was so happy with his creation. The man hugged Su tightly and happily exclaimed that he was a newbie, but he had already accomplished so much. They would not lag behind him and would work hard tomorrow. The other men crowded around their table and began pouring Su alcohol, after which one exclaimed that he was now one of them. Let him drink to the bottom. MC was very happy to chat, but the evening soon ended. The next morning, Rek led him to a cave where there were deposits of 1,000-year-old cold iron, and he, raising an eyebrow in confusion, asked if this was the place he mentioned. He said that they couldn't enter because of the barrier. The man said that it was true, but the 1,000-year-old cold iron really was there. Su was slightly upset and noted that there were a lot of monsters there. Is it really safe? He told him that from now on, everything was up to him, and he rubbed his chin in confusion, wondering how they would mine or there. Rex said he was going to another mine, and if he needed him, he could call him anytime. After he left, a system notification appeared in front of MC about the start of a new story, which made him slightly nervous. 100 years had passed, and the power of the mage who had set up the barrier had weakened. The monsters trapped here for 100 years were now enraged. The barrier would be broken in 3 minutes. Su immediately rushed to the foreman and warned him that the barrier was about to collapse, and they needed to evacuate the miners before that happened. Rek, with a puzzled look, said that couldn't be true. After all, the barrier had stood for 100 years, and there had been no problems. Then a roar was heard, confirming MC's words. Everyone froze and looked up, and the mine began to collapse, and rocks hit several miners. The foreman, helping his comrade up, exclaimed that the mine was collapsing, and they should flee from here immediately. Hinsu waved his hand and told everyone to evacuate. The monsters would soon break out. The man who had been drinking with him yesterday told him to go first. They would first save those inside and then leave. His colleagues agreed with him and told them to go first. They couldn't abandon their comrades. Rek firmly said they were right. They couldn't leave. Most likely special magic had triggered the collapse. They would save the people trapped inside. MC looked down and thought that according to the task, the barrier would soon fall and the monsters would break out. What should they do? The system gave him a mission to save the miners from death. 58 people are inside the mine and 38 are outside in danger. The reward is unknown and failure of the task will result in the death of the miners. Currently, 96 people are alive. The reward depends on the final number. Hansu nervously clenched his teeth and thought that he needed to act more decisively. These were the same people as those he had already met in Ares. He pulled out his sword and gripped it tightly in his hands, telling Bella that if he missed even one monster, she should cover him. She worriedly asked if he wasn't afraid at all. He was taking on an impossible task again. He turned to her and said with a smile that he told her, strangers don't die. He would hold off the monsters at the entrance to the mine. After that, he stood in front of the barrier and prepared himself while the monsters began to break through, slamming against the barrier with all their might. MC wondered if this would be enough to deal with them. He couldn't handle them with just the sword. To stop the monsters, he needed something completely new, a special weapon that would require much more. He closed his eyes and concentrated on his creation. Had never worked with anything like this before. If he initiated an emergency creation using a massive amount of ore, he would eventually be able to deal a single powerful blow. He opened his eyes and a glowing sphere appeared in his hands, attracting chunks of ore, and then a sword of cold steel grew from it. The system warned him that the barrier would soon collapse. A countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. An explosion thundered and the barrier collapsed. Hansu prepared himself and monsters emerged. Among them, a rock troll, an orc, and a wolf. He immediately rushed to attack and the system notified him that the 30-second limit was ignored. It would be lifted after one strike. The rock troll rushed towards him, and he shouted that as long as he was here, no monster would break through. He raised his sword above his head, swung it with all his might, and decapitated the monster with the ice storm technique. Huge blocks of ice emerged from the ground, impaling the monsters on sharp spikes, and MC dealt with them all in one fell swoop. The cold iron blade shattered, and he looked at it thoughtfully. Then he looked up at the blocks of ice, and an idea occurred to him. If he used the right materials to create this sword, the effect would be completely different. Since the dungeon was still full of monsters, he looked around to check on the miners and saw that they were working hard to save their comrades who were buried under rocks. The system reminded him that the reward depended on the number of surviving miners, and he needed to save them. He confidently clenched his fist and thought that these people were no longer just NPCs to him. He experienced the same thing when he went to save his father. These people were ready to do anything to protect their loved ones. He turned to another cave from which monsters had already begun to emerge and thought that he would definitely protect them. Seeing the humans, the monsters immediately sped up and charged. Then Hansu ran towards them and ran into the cave to replace the monsters in the part of the dungeon where there are no people. They turned around and followed him. Then he drew his sword and turned sharply, parrying an orc's blow, and noticed that the wolf had decided to attack him from behind. He quickly turned around, dealt a couple of blows to all the monsters around, and there was still one left. The troll swung his club, MC prepared, and swung his sword, cutting it in two, and then delivered a sweeping blow to the troll's chest, causing it to immediately fall to the ground. But the monsters weren't finished yet. They surrounded him and growled menacingly, and he closed his eyes and concentrated, thinking that it was good that he had learned the art of the King of Swords. He assumed a fighting stance and using the Sword of the Raging Wave, attacked the monsters with a shockwave, causing them to crumble. The Sword of the Raging Wave deals 100% additional damage on impact, and a successful attack on a vulnerable area deals a 140 additional damage. But this also expends a lot of energy. Hyansu staggered and fell from fatigue, saying that this was much more amazing than he thought. After that, a system notification appeared in front of him. The mine was cleared. The sudden mission to rescue the miners was completed. All 96 people survived. He completed a new episode with an excellent result. He smiled, glad that everyone was safe, and the system said that by taking advantage of the circumstances, he could get a greater reward. He thought that saving people was a reward in itself, but since he was offered something better, he would not refuse. Leaning on his sword, he stood up and had a great idea. Meanwhile, Rek pulled the last victim out of the mine and turned to his comrades, smiling, saying that they could rest easy now. Everyone was safe and sound. They began to hug, happy about it. And Bella passed by them, looking at each of them, and told Rek that it looked like Hun-Soo had taken the monsters into the dungeon. Hearing this, he immediately told the miners that the blacksmith had taken the monster deeper into the dungeon, all for the sake of protecting them. The joy on their faces gave way to concern. Now they understood why they hadn't seen the monsters. The foreman said that he, as the leader, was ashamed because they hadn't saved all of their comrades yet. All the miners who were still on their feet should immediately follow him into the dungeon. After that, they armed themselves with torches and went looking for him. They scattered through the cave, shouting his name, and finally found him sitting unconscious by a stone. Everyone immediately rushed to him, and Bella exclaimed that he was seriously injured. She pressed her ear to his chest and thought that despite the wounds, his pulse was steady. She was about to calm everyone down and say that he was okay, but MC grabbed her hand and whispered that she should just sit quietly. After that, he told them, looking exhausted, that he was okay. The battle was tough, but he was lucky. He was able to defeat all the monsters. Everyone is safe, right? Rex sat down next to him and took his hand, thanking him. He felt sorry that they had completely forgotten about him while they were rescuing the others, and he was terribly ashamed of it. He had done nothing for him, only treated him to drinks and food, so why had he done such a reckless act? He replied that they all treated him and Lady Bella like family. Seeing how devoted they were to each other, he couldn't stay away. He just wanted to help them somehow, and he was sincerely glad that everyone was safe now. He coughed up blood, which scared the man, then called him a fool and unintentionally pushing Bella away, hugged Hun-Soo tightly and burst into tears saying that they would never forget his kindness. Bella, meanwhile, looked at them in bewilderment and thought, what was wrong with him? He had been perfectly fine just now. The foreman exclaimed that now was not the time for talking. They needed to quickly bring their savior inside. He helped Han-Soo up and headed for the exit, and the system informed him that the foreman and 95 other people would never forget him. He grinned and, remembering how he rolled on the ground to look beaten, thought that, as he suspected, acting out the drama was a good idea. Bella noticed his satisfied grin, and then he gave her a thumbs up, and she realized that he had been deliberately pretending to be weak all this time to garner pity. Time passed, and MC woke up. He yawned widely, saying that he had slept so soundly, and suddenly Banya's loud exclamation was heard from the side. He immediately jumped up from his seat as soon as he saw that Hyun-Soo had woken up. Hyun-Soo was scared and asked how long he had been there, but he ignored him and turned to the door, loudly shouting that Hyun-Soo was awake. Rek immediately burst into the room and asked how he was feeling. Was he feeling better already? MC told him that everything was fine. The others were fine too, weren't they? The men looked into the room and told him that they were fine, but he should take care of himself first. Rex sat down on a chair next to the bed and said that he had told him that he had things to do. After all, he was a blacksmith. He was a little sad since he was leaving soon, but he wanted to tell him something. He asked what was going on, and then the man turned to the door and told them to come in. Several miners entered the room, and Rex said that today they would all go into the mine for him. They wanted to thank him. After all, he had risked his life for them. They would extract that 1,000-year-old cold iron that he was looking for. He asked in surprise, would they really do this for him? He just did what he had to, but he was still grateful to them. Now he understood what he wanted to tell him. Rek turned to the men who, taking his hint, left. He cleared his throat and said that there was actually something else, but he thought it would be better if his son said it himself. Banya awkwardly scratched the back of his head, then with a serious expression, called Han-Soo their savior, and kneeling before him, declared that he wanted to follow him. The system informed him that the character swore eternal allegiance to him, that he had the potential to become a legendary miner, and that he could accept him as a follower. The MC stared at the system window in surprise, wondering what this meant. Meanwhile, in the special user department, Soyeon was keeping a close eye on him. And judging by the pile of garbage around her, she hadn't stopped working. She clutched her head and, staring at the screen, wondered why this had happened at a time when the group leader was not there. This player was at it again. He wasn't even the guild leader and didn't own any territory, yet a legendary NPC wanted to become his follower. Realizing they were about to be reworked again, she despaired. Hansu, meanwhile, excitedly asked the guy to stand up. He didn't deserve such honors, but he firmly declared that he did. He saw everything with his own eyes, how he wielded a pickaxe, and how he rushed to save them. It was incredible and very touching, but most of all, it inspired deep respect in him. He looked up at him and excitedly exclaimed that he promised to put his all into the cause. He would mine or for him, so he was asking him to take him with him. MC looked at him slightly confused and thought that he could sense his sincerity. There was not a drop of pretense in his devotion. Noticing that he was lost in thought, Banya worriedly asked, "Is he not suitable because he doesn't yet have worthy skills?" He excitedly waved his hands and said that wasn't true at all. He just wasn't ready to be someone's mentor yet. Could he take a moment to think about it? He extended his hand to help him up and asked for time to think things over and prepare. When he was ready, he would let him know. Banya looked at him with delight, and he said that when that day came, he would join him. Immediately after, the guy hugged him tightly and began to thank him, and the system informed him that it had accepted Banya as a follower. Information about him was now available to him. Banya is an epic character of level 165 and has good abilities corresponding to his profession, and his description indicated that he was destined to become the greatest miner in the world. He learned much faster and had extremely high potential for growth. Insu hugged him back and thought that he had found a strong ally. From now on, they would grow stronger together. Banya finally let him go and said he didn't want to rush him, but he wondered when they would see each other again. He told him it would be a long time at all, and he excitedly said that in the meantime he would mine or with the other miners. They decided to chat informally with each other, and Rek watched them with a smile the whole time. Soon, it was time to leave the ice mine, and everyone gathered at the portal to see him off and give him the ore. He received 415 iron ore and 51 cold iron. Rek rolled a cart up to him and said that he had kept him waiting. He pulled a cloth from the cart and proudly declared that it was 1,000-year-old cold iron. This is a unique ore that can only be processed by a level 300 blacksmith. It increases fire resistance by 91%, raises ice skills to a unique level, increases blade sharpness by 150%, and sword striking power by 58% with infinite durability. This is iron that has been lying in the ground for 10,000 years. Even though it has the same name, it cannot be compared to ordinary cold iron. MC said that this was simply incredible, and Bella whispered in his ear that he must be proud of himself. He immediately shut her up and asked her not to say that. Otherwise, he would be misunderstood. She did not understand what he was talking about, and Rex said that he never thought that he would see 1,000-year-old cold iron in real life. It's all thanks to him. MC turned to the other miners and bowed to them, thanking him for everything, and they said that they were always happy to help him. He could stay a little longer. Before he left, Banya ran towards him in tears, and he waved his hand, saying that he was just about to give him something. He took out his pickaxe and thought that the longer Banya dug with this, the more minerals he would get. Banya was touched by his generosity because it was the very pickaxe he treasured so much. He hugged the pickaxe and shouted that he would be loyal to him until the end of his days, and he thought he was so happy that he even felt a little embarrassed. After that, he waved goodbye to them all, and Bella, heading for the portal, thought she called him a swindler, but he still risked his life to save them and ultimately earned their trust. She walked through the portal and said it was pretty cool, and he followed her asking, did she just say cool? Was that what she said about him? But then she chose to ignore him. A few days later, the Salamander Dungeon. Haksu sat on a stone with a doomed look. He had already lost count trying. Even a 5th-rank blacksmith couldn't forge the shield he needed. It looked like he wouldn't be able to clear this dungeon. At that moment, an eagle appeared above him with a package for him. It landed on his hand, and the system informed him that Hin-Su had sent him a gift. He accepted it with the thought that he was only level 59, so it was hardly anything special. But still, it was very kind of him. He decided to open the gift, and a new system window appeared in front of him. He stared at it in surprise, then blinked, thinking he was seeing things, and then shocked thought, what is this? Could this really be some kind of bug? It was Hyun's personal shield of a unique rank perfectly suited to his requirements. Fire resistance 201%. Defense against fire-type monsters 247. Against fire-type monsters, attack increases by 222%. Passive and active skills are tied to the ice attribute. This is Hyun's 8th personal shield, an almost legendary item. If the material was as close to the original as possible, it would be perfect. Hyuk-soo, confused, said that he had much more talent than he thought. He glanced at the drawing on the front of the shield and wondered if this woman with snakes was Medusa, the Gorgon. He created a shield based on the myths about her, a true masterpiece. The system notified him that there was very little time left until the end of the quest, and he stood up thinking that it never ceased to amaze him. Maybe with this artifact he could pass the dungeon. After that, he entered the Salamander dungeon, and the system notified him that this was his last secret quest. Meanwhile, MC met with Belle, and she delightedly said that thanks to him, she finally saw the kingdom's throne room. He said it was all thanks to her help, and she asked how he was doing. He told her that everything was fine. After they returned from the ice mine, he had been constantly caring for his father. The girl said that she heard that caring for the sick is very tiring. Has his father gotten better? He looked down sadly and told her that he wasn't conscious yet, but he hadn't lost hope. He felt a little awkward about this conversation, and she decided to change the subject, saying that today, they were going to discuss the guild. She showed him a couple of documents and said that she thought they should act as a team. Her first goal was to make him the most famous blacksmith in the country. If they created a guild with players much higher in level than them, it would be harder for them to achieve their goals. The fastest way for a guild to grow and become famous was to find a star among its ranks, and that star would be him. Does he have anyone in mind for the main team? He thought for a moment and said that so far, the only person he could think of was the friend who introduced him to this game. And he fell silent, thinking for a few seconds, and said that he didn't know anyone else. He hadn't had time to get close to the other players yet. She laughed and said that there was nothing wrong with that. They could do it. And then someone came to his mind, and he said that there was actually one person. She immediately opened the menu and asked what his nickname was. He told her that his name was Bark, and she said that she had never heard of him. What was his level? He told her that he hadn't asked anything except his nickname and class, and she wanted to check his character information, but it was hidden. After that, she said that they needed one of the future founders, and he suggested a person he knew almost nothing about. He thought for a second and told her that when he was at a complete standstill in his life, he sacrificed his own gains so that he could start over, so he owed him a lot. She leaned back in her chair tiredly and asked if he was by any chance a businessman. He was surprised that she had guessed this and confirmed it, and she shook her head in annoyance, saying that he might not realize it, but his value in Ares was very high. He might try to use him to start his own business or even aim for the guild leader's position. Hyun-soo confidently said that he would never do such a thing. He would never lie to him or use him, so he was sure of it. She looked slightly surprised, then sighed heavily and said that it was up to him to accept him or not. But then he should let her meet him. He agreed, and she asked him to try to hide the fact that he was the blacksmith Hyun. But here's the catch. The gift he sent him had Hyun written on it. Belle immediately began scolding him while Hyuk-soo was busy completing the dungeon. A salamander attacked him. He immediately hit the monster with his shield and thanks to his frost skills dealt it a lot of damage, after which the salamander immediately exploded. He looked at his shield and remarked that it was simply amazing. He didn't think everything would work exactly as he wanted. He looked at the inside of the shield and noticed something interesting. The inscription Kyun. He immediately broke into a smile and exclaimed that this couldn't be. Could Hyun-soo really be that blacksmith? What else could he surprise him with? He was thinking about how to thank him, and at that very moment someone's huge hand appeared above him, which he noticed at the last moment, and because of this, missed the blow. The elemental threw him aside, and he hit his back against the stone wall. Then she created several fireballs behind her back and sent them all at him. An explosion occurred. Rocks and pieces of ice flew in all directions, and a large depression remained where Hyuk-soo had been. To the elemental's surprise, he withstood this attack and even remained unharmed, and she asked how he blocked her attack. Let him tell her the name of the one who created this shield. She directed fireballs at him again. He quickly ran away, and dodging her attacks approached her from behind. And she said that if he didn't tell, she would pursue both him and his real body behind which he was hiding. Hyuk-soo became nervous and thought that if the real character came for him, he would have to quit the game, but he would never give up Han-soo to survive. He pounced on the elemental in a jump, and she, throwing a fireball at him, asked, "So he's not afraid of death?" He blocked the attack with his shield and exclaimed with a smirk that she was nothing. When she extended her hand toward him, the system warned him that the Flame Queen's clone was using a deadly hand, making him nervous. The explosion hit him, and he cried out in pain. And she exclaimed, "He's risking his life for some artifact." The system notified him that he had 33 health points remaining, and he, remembering Hansu, gathered his strength and shouted that this wasn't just an artifact. It was a gift from his comrade. The system informed him that the shield was obeying his will, after which a frosty air spread throughout the cave, making her nervous, and the hidden skill Ice Aegis activated. The elemental grew angry and exclaimed, "He thinks he can defeat her with such cheap tricks?" The system warned him that the clone was preparing a powerful spell, and at that moment he threw a spear at her with all his might. Time seemed to slow down for her. She saw a piece of ice right before her eyes and let out a sigh before the spear instantly pierced her body and sank into the ground, splitting it into pieces. The system informed him that he had defeated the Flame Queen's clone, and the Salamander dungeon quest was complete. He had received a set of fire dragon armor, but there was still danger. The ceiling collapsed, and Hyuk-soo barely managed to avoid it. After that, he caught his breath, and the system informed him that the secret test had been passed. He refused to reveal his comrade's name even when his life was in danger. He exclaimed that this was actually natural, and the system declared that he had been granted the right to evolve, which confused and surprised him. It was after all a hidden class change. The system declared that, as a tank, he was already ideal. He had been assigned the epic class growing. A rising one can even reach the legendary rank. It's a special class that protects something precious. Hyuk-soo thought for a second, then asked with a smile, so this dungeon was a class quest from the start? The system reminded him that he still hadn't joined a guild. It was recommended that he join one as soon as possible. He rubbed his chin with an alluring grin and thought that it seemed he had a lot to talk about with Hansu. After that, he went to meet him at some tavern. With his shiny armor, he stood out quite a bit and everyone's attention was focused on him. MC rose from his chair waving at him, and people started whispering about him, saying that he seemed to be a ranker, and Belle thought this guy looked absolutely stunning. They said he's not an easy guy, so she better be on her guard. Hyuk-soo walked up to Hun-soo, and with a wide smile on his face, placed his hand on his shoulder and thanked him. Thanks to him, he was able to complete the quest, and he had no idea who he really was. Belle immediately waved his hands excitedly, so as not to say anything unnecessary. And he, looking around, said that he hadn't noticed there were too many spectators. He took out a bag of coins and said that he would pay for everything so they would move to a place where they could talk privately. After that, they went to the private guest quarters of the palace and decided to discuss everything over dinner. Hyuk-soo cleared his throat and returned to the topic. He saw the inscription Hyun engraved on the shield and immediately understood everything. Blacksmith Hyun was actually Hyun-soo. Belle mentally noted that he got straight to the point, and MC confirmed it. He didn't want to hide anything from him, so he left his mark on the artifact. Hyuk-soo beckoned to him with his hand, and he, leaning on the table, reached for him. The man, with a wide smile on his face, patted him on the shoulder and thanked him, saying that he'd realized it when he tried to buy back the forge. He really was special. He was a little embarrassed to say it. But during the quest, when someone tried to take the artifact he'd created, he said it was a gift from a friend. Hinsu's face immediately broke into a smile, thanking him for these words and saying that since he intended to keep his identity a secret, he would also keep this a secret. Belle looked at him slightly guiltily, thinking that he was trying to use Hyun-soo, but she was wrong to doubt him. She cleared her throat and stood up from her chair, saying that she would like to introduce herself to him. Her name is Belle. She is Hyun-soo's manager. She was biased against him at first, and for that, she wants to apologize. He didn't understand what she meant, and she smiled awkwardly, saying that since he knew who Hyun-soo was, she thought that he would try to use him somehow. She had already assumed the worst outcome. He said that there was some truth to that. Many people would try to use someone like him. To be honest, he himself was thinking about creating a guild with him, but he didn't want to achieve anything by using him. Besides, it seems like he is already surrounded by good people, so he is calm, and that is enough for him. MC said that he actually wanted to tell him something. He wants to invite him to his guild. The man was slightly surprised by this and said that he wanted to work with him. The thing is, he wants to become stronger together with them. Hyuk-soo looked closely at his serious face, thinking about it, and Belle froze, waiting for his decision. After a few seconds, he smirked and remarked that it sounded good. From now on, he will protect him. He extended his hand and said that he would like to introduce himself properly. His nickname is Bark. He is level 371, and his class is a growing tank. As far as he knows, he may soon reach the legendary class. Belle was very surprised by this news. Hyuk-soo thought he also has a legendary class. right? Now MC also wanted to introduce himself properly. His real name is Hyun-soo, and he is level 80. His class is the God of Blacksmiths. He was very surprised. And when they shook hands, MC said that he didn't even have a name for the guild yet, but he was looking forward to them working together. He smiled and said that the feeling was mutual, then called him the future leader. Belle was happy watching them, and Hyuk-soo suggested that they start eating while they chatted. He also wants to pay him for that gift. He clicked something in the system window, and Hyun-soo said that he gave the shield as a gift, so he didn't need to do anything. But it was too late. He transferred 400 million won to his account. He was very surprised and immediately started waving his hands excitedly, saying that it was just a gift. And he laughed, saying that he couldn't accept it so easily. Has he already thought about how he will develop his guild? Belle said that her first goal is to make the blacksmith more famous. After that, she wants to take orders for creating items. He became interested and asked, so she wants to make the guild's name famous first? And what's her plan? She told him they'll put the hottest guy on air, and it'll be Hyun-soo. He stared at her in surprise, not understanding if he'd misheard the words about a hot guy, and then nervously asked what she said about going on air. Is that a joke? They both stared at him with enticing glances, and he smiled wryly, thinking it was simply amazing. Since the game became popular, major television channels have partnered with it. Online networks, private streamers, they've all released content about the game. Among them, one channel used to have the highest ratings broadcasting the game. After a while, the staff was already busily preparing for the broadcast. The host climbed into the game capsule, and the producer, so nervous that he started biting his nails, asked, "They all know that their ratings have been dropping lately, right?" His colleague confirmed this, saying that's why they've already built up interest. Blacksmith Hyun declined to appear, but the martial arts tournament winner said he'd come in his place. They both prayed as this could be their last chance. A message appeared on the screen announcing preparations for the broadcast, and 6,000 viewers had already gathered. One of them wrote that the legendary Truth Room would soon begin, and another viewer noted that this was true, but they only bring boring guests. In the Truth Room, they force you to tell only the truth. The broadcast finally began. The host appeared and greeted all the viewers, saying that they hadn't seen each other in a while. Their guest today is the martial arts tournament winner. Everyone is interested in his real face, right? Someone in the viewer said that they said the blacksmith will also appear, but he won't show his face. Another anonymous viewer said that rumor has it that he is a short, bald, old man with a beer belly. They started arguing that today's viewership would drop to 5,000, and the host said that, as expected, they would move straight to the main event. He pointed to a chair next to him and said, "Here he is, the winner of the martial arts tournament, Hyun-soo." As soon as he appeared, all the viewers were very impressed by his appearance. And while he was chatting with the host, he noticed that the entire chat was littered with question marks. Is something really wrong? One of the anonymous users wrote that he was simply handsome. Why is he so cute? He awkwardly laughed in response, and a viewer named Roan donated 500 million won and asked, when will the Blacksmith Heim come out? The rest of the viewers in the chat were amazed because he is the #1 guild leader, one of the strongest blacksmiths. A few days ago, in the guild's meeting room, Sylvia, a member of the Black Envil Guild, asked why they were holding an emergency meeting when the blacksmith was busy. Dax asked if she had even read the community. This is a hot topic right now, especially after he became famous for creating a sword for the Sword King Barad. Bon asked, but they don't have to hold him back, right? Dax said it never hurt to be cautious. They need to recruit him before he becomes even more famous. He turned to the leader and asked, right? Roan said he listened to their opinions. And as for the blacksmith, Hun, he would check everything personally and then decide. That's why he went to watch the stream and even sent a donation. The host was very happy with such a generous donation and clapped his hands, saying that they had an incredible guest watching today. The leader of the best blacksmith guild in Korea is watching their stream. You can't see something like that even for money. He asked the viewers to support them, and then the blacksmith, Hun, sent a donation of 100,000 won, saying that he would do an interview today. Seeing this, the host became very excited and said that they were very happy to see him. And the MC thought that, as expected, he set everything up so that people thought that they were two different people. The host decided to return to the topic and turned to Han-soo, asking him to introduce himself. How old is he? He answered that he is 23 years old, and he asked what he does for a living, to which he replied that for now, he puts everything into the game. The host asked if he has a girlfriend, and he laughed, saying that it would be nice. Then the girls immediately started donating to them, saying that they don't have a boyfriend either and they want to know more about him. The host was very happy and grinned seductively, saying that since everything turned out this way, they will ask the blacksmith a few questions. What does Hin do for a living? The MC remembered Belle telling him to pretend to talk to Hin Su through an earpiece, and he touched his ear and told him he was a blacksmith. The host asked about his age, and he told him that Hin Su said it was a secret. Then he asked about his height and weight, and he smiled nervously, saying that this was also a secret, apparently. The viewer's suspicions that he was some old bald man only increased, and the host whispered to him, "Does he want to ruin the whole show?" Han Su wondered if he insisted on hiding everything so persistently. Would his image be completely ruined? If he continued to dodge questions, nothing good would happen. He firmly stated that he wanted to introduce himself through his works, and the man stared at him in surprise. He immediately touched his ear and smiled nervously, saying that Han Su had just said that. The host remarked that it sounded good, and coincidentally, they'd prepared the perfect content to showcase his work. He brought up a picture on the stream and told everyone to look at it. It was the perfect collaboration between martial arts tournament winner Han Su and Blacksmith Han. They were calling it a timed dungeon mission. Blacksmith Han must create artifacts in 10 days, and Han Su must clear the dungeon using these artifacts. The viewers were surprised. It was incredibly difficult. Even top blacksmiths would have a hard time standing out in such conditions. The host smiled nervously and silently asked everyone to shut up. How could anyone be distracted from such cool content? This would definitely revive their channel. After that, they received a donation from Blacksmith Roan. He said that if he made a rare item in 10 days, he would give 1 million. For an epic 3 million and for a unique 10 million. Could he really set such a mission? The host became very excited, and Rong said that if he couldn't do it, then he would have to reveal information about the sword that was made for the Sword King, Barrett. The host was delighted by such crazy content, and the MC frowned. So Rong decided to see what he could do, and Hansu, touching his ear, said that Hansu accepted his challenge. After this eventful day, the MC returned to the forge and got down to business. Meanwhile, Belle watched the community's reactions. They were surprised and very interested. She said that ever since he appeared, the entire community has been talking about him. What does it feel like to be famous? He ignored her, and then she grabbed his shoulder tightly and called out loudly, startling him. She asked what amazing thing he plans to create. He told her that he was still thinking about it. The artifacts he creates will be at least rare. But since Roan has raised the stakes, he wants to show off his unique rank and properly promote himself. Belle said that the community thinks this is a full-fledged battle between Hun and Roan, and he, confused, said that it is not really a battle. She stated that this is not the case at all. It has already turned into a rivalry. If he completes this mission, he will receive not only money, but also Hun's fame as a blacksmith will skyrocket. The Black Anvil will definitely try to recruit him. He asked what would happen if he couldn't do it. She told him that then the value of Hyunsu's blacksmiths would fall and the feature would disappear. He stood up and said that he had to succeed no matter the cost. After which, she thanked her with a smile. She had greatly encouraged him. She said that he could rely on her, and then he rudely pushed her outside, saying that from now on, he would focus on creating artifacts. So let her go, they would see each other next time. Realizing that she had just been kicked out, she was taken aback. 10 days later, inside the dungeon, the broadcast began. And due to the noise in the community, a whopping 81,000 viewers gathered, shocking the producer. He grabbed the scriptwriter by the shoulder and excitedly exclaimed that these were their highest numbers, and he clasped his hands together and began to pray that everyone would like this content. When Hyun-soo appeared in the dungeon, the host announced that the broadcast was starting. The first stage is pretty simple. There are about 40 monsters below, and his mission is to break a red rock on a hill 400 meters away on the opposite side, breaking through them. For reference, the person who took first place is currently 7th in the overall national rankings with a record of 1 minute 23 seconds, which has never been broken. If he sets a new record, he will receive 10 million won. The host was very happy while the viewers began to discuss how long it would all take. The MC walked to a cliff from which all the monsters below could be seen, and the countdown began. As soon as it all started, he looked into the camera and said that the artifact he would show today was not a bow and arrow. It was a glove. The broadcast viewers were not very confident in his success, and then he pulled the arrow back on the bowstring with all his might, and his glove increased his strength by 111 points as well as his attack range. Destructive power increases along with an increased strength stat. He released the arrow, and with a loud whistle, it flew at high speed over the monsters and shattered the red stone into pieces. Thus, he set a new record for the first stage of the time dungeon. It took him 41 seconds to complete it. The host was delighted and exclaimed that since he set a new record, he would receive 10 million won. Hansu smiled and thanked them all for the prize, but the reward he would receive would be 20 million won. He was surprised. Then MC turned to Roan asking, "He hasn't forgotten about their bet, has he?" He grinned and showed him the glove, saying that it was of a unique rank. A new message appeared in front of him, and Roan asked it to display information about the artifact. He showed it to him, and he stared at the screen, puzzled, making sure that this artifact was indeed of a unique rank and was made by Hansu. This glove is specially made for an archer. It significantly increases strength as well as range, piercing power, and destructive power. Hansu asked, was he convinced now? Thought for a second, then sent him a donation of 10 million won, and he immediately thanked him for it. The viewers noticed his eyes lit up, and the MC said the blacksmith had made an interesting offer. He said he would sell the artifact at auction right now. Roan walked away, asking his guild members not to change the broadcast and to tell him if there was anything important. At this point, he solemnly waved his hand and announced the start of the auction. The starting price was 10,000 gold, but no one rushed to buy it, which took him by surprise. He smiled awkwardly and wondered why everyone was silent. Was the price too high? But Bell had told him to set that price. He nervously glanced at the chat, wondering if this was the right price, and then all the viewers began to quickly raise their bids. Hinsu was so excited that he started thanking them all, although they should be thanking them, and thought he had a big catch. He bowed and asked them to send their bids to the Hinforge private messages. The host returned and thanked everyone for waiting. The second stage is finally starting. The auction continues, so don't leave. What stage is next? This time, MC's opponent was a level 121 Cyclops, and he prepared a heavy sword for it. Everyone was wondering if he could defeat the Cyclops. And at that moment, the monster raised its club over its head. Hansu concentrated, quickly jumped to the side, and then pounced on the Cyclops. But while he was in the air, he decided to punch him. Fortunately, he managed to block the blow. The spectators thought he was killed by this blow, but they jumped to conclusions. MC, with renewed vigor, rushed into the attack. He swung his sword, and the Cyclops swung his club. Their weapons clashed, but Hansu's sword proved stronger, cutting off the monster's arm before landing several blows and landing nearby. The audience was surprised that he killed the Cyclops with one blow. Was it the champion or the weapon that was so cool? Everyone was curious about the rank of the artifact. They thought the sword was at least rare, and the MC, seeing the chat, laughed awkwardly and said that the second item was a bit disappointing. They immediately inundated him with messages asking to see the sword stats, and some viewers laughed at that. This weapon turned out to be quite common. The description said that this custom sword received a random penalty. The audience was surprised. The difference from the first artifact was simply huge. So Hyun just got lucky the first time. The first item was unique and the second one is common. Even an ordinary blacksmith could do that. Hyun-soo smiled awkwardly and asked, "That's a bit disappointing, right?" He thought that he didn't even know that emergency crafting through the panel reduces the rank by 2 levels. There was no notification about it, but it's so unfair. Roan, watching the stream, decided that Blacksmith Hun's success was just luck, and then he received a call. A member of guild said that the second artifact was so-so, but he still thought they should hire him. The leader remained silent, and he asked how much they should offer him as a bonus. He glanced at the stream and answered that they should offer him 2 billion. After which, he ended the call and thought that maybe it was too much, but it was better to hire an experienced blacksmith and not bother. He decided to examine the sword stats more closely and noticed something interesting. Meanwhile, the host exclaimed that it was simply amazing. He had flawlessly cleared the second stage, but the last stage will not be easy. But why? The thing is, there will be a bunch of bosses there. Han-soo needs to reach the hill with the flag. Of course, the monsters won't just stand there and watch. He needs to reach the flag without getting kicked out. Honestly, after his words, they might ask, is this the final stage? The viewers agreed with him, saying they were already thinking about leaving the broadcast. And he said that the monster in this stage would be a level 138 werewolf. A werewolf's hide is so thick that even players of the same level can't penetrate it. Therefore, the chance of success in this stage is less than 20%. Even the fastest record holder barely made it through this stage. He told Hunsu to start and wished him luck, and Hunsu said that there was nothing he could do with the weapon. There was no point in regretting it. He needed to focus on the final stage. The viewers told him to get started quickly. But when they saw that he wasn't moving at all, they asked if there was no time left. He declared that he wasn't going to run from the monsters, and they laughed at his boldness. Then he pulled out a bow and said that with this weapon he would kill them all. The audience advised him to run while he could, but he wasn't going to do that. He turned to the huge crowd of monsters, took aim, and then fired, hitting one of them in the head. The werewolf screamed and grabbed his head. His whole body began to tremble, and the ground beneath his feet cracked, pressing him sharply against it. There was a roar. Chunks of earth flew apart, and the MC happily said that this time, everything was definitely right. The audience didn't understand what they had just seen and, delighted, asked him to quickly show them of this weapon. Hunsu said he now wants to introduce them to a third item inspired by a bow from Jeju Island myths. They say a great king used this bow to shoot down the sun and moon, and this item is called the 1,000-gun bow. When he was little, his father told him the legends of Jeju Island. Long ago in the world of the living, there were 2 suns and 2 moons causing chaos in the world. The king of the world of the living, Sobilwang, asked his older brother, the king of the underworld, Debilwang, for help. King Debilwang descended to the world of the living to help his brother. He used a bow weighing 1,000 gun or 600 kilograms to shoot down the extra sun and moon and restore order. That's the story. But he was more interested in this bow and told his father that he wanted to make one too. Now that he's grown up, he's taken it seriously. He thought that if he used his knowledge, he might be able to create a real bow weighing 1,000 gun, but it was unclear how much strength he would need. A brilliant idea came to him. Instead of a bow weighing 1,000 gun, he could increase the weight of an enemy hit by an arrow. He decided to try it and got some black wood with a smooth texture used as a material for imbuing special abilities. That's how he created this bow. At the moment, he quickly broke through a horde of monsters, shooting an arrow into each of them, and they immediately fell. Watching this, the host exclaimed in delight that this couldn't be. Could werewolves really be killed that easily with an arrow? The audience was also amazed, and the MC looked around saying that he dealt with the werewolves, but something was wrong. The atmosphere changed as soon as he entered the forest. A new group of werewolves leaped out from the shadows of the trees. He was about to kill them all with one shot this time, but he didn't notice another monster lurking behind him. The wolf opened its mouth wide, and a deafening howl echoed through them, raising a wind in the forest. Hyun-soo turned to check and froze in horror, unable to understand why he was feeling this fear. The system informed him that he was hearing the roar of a powerful predator activating his survival instinct. The effect: fear. A wolf emerged from the forest, its steps heavy, and the chains around its neck clanking loudly. The system informed him of the beginning of a new story, the descent of a fragment of Fenrir, the king of level 178 werewolves. Those who catch it will receive a reward. Even the host himself didn't know such a monster existed in this dungeon and clutched his head. The audience worriedly commented that Fenrir was one of the legendary monsters, and fear slowed movement. At this time, the MC couldn't move, and the werewolves immediately took advantage of this and pounced on him, landing a couple of blows before retreating. Despite the blows, Hunsu managed to stay on his feet, and then a new group of monsters ran towards him. He tried to use his bow, but his arms barely moved, and he cursed, and the system warned him that he was under the bleeding effect. Under the influence of fear and bleeding, his physical stats decrease. He nervously gritted his teeth and thought that his lack of strength was due to the effects, in which case he would compensate for the lack of strength with items. He put on a glove, thanks to which he was able to immediately fire his bow, and the arrow flew straight towards Fenrir. He responded with the skill claws of destruction and broke the arrow in half, followed by an explosion. Because of the veil of dust, the host couldn't tell if he was okay, and one of the viewers asked, he was supposed to die from this, right? This is all madness. Is it even possible? Luckily, Hyun-soo wasn't hurt. There was no one at the scene of the explosion except Fenrir. He ran behind the trees and jumped, ending up right above the wolf's head, then took aim and said it was a dead end. He shot him right in the eye. And while he was in the air, the wolf decided to slap him with its paw, and he smirked and said that this wasn't the end. The true power of this bow was elsewhere. After that, an enormous pressure fell on the wolf. The weight of 600 kilograms pinned him to the ground. The wolf continued to be pressed into the ground. It crumbled, and pieces flew in all directions. The host was amazed by such force, and MC meanwhile climbed onto the monster's body and sat on it with a victorious look. The host grabbed his head in shock and exclaimed, "What just happened? And what is this broken bow?" Immediately after this, the chat was flooded with offers to buy this bow. Among them, even the famous #1 archer, Yen. These messages also appeared in front of the MC. He told them that Hin just sent him a message. He said that he would never sell this bow. Some viewers were upset and gave up, but others did not give up and began to beg him to sell this bow. Hyun-soo jumped off the monster's body and approached the flag, saying that he firmly said several times that he would not sell this bow. Instead, only for archers he would accept one crafting order. He raised the flag and addressed the archers, saying that just like at the auction, let them send a message to Hun's forge. After which, he exited the dungeon and thanked them for watching. He moved to his rented forge and, seeing a bunch of messages, thought that the effect of the broadcast was really amazing. Today's results are good. He received legendary rank materials and a lot of experience. Now he was level 100 and could create his own guild. He remembered Hyuksun and Bell and thought that now he could finally be with his people. And most importantly, he could take Banya with him. The system asked him to name the guild, and he thought about it. With the meaning of wishing for a bright future, he chose the name Gwangmyeong. The system informed him that he had become the guild leader and received the title of Lord's Grace. Immediately after, he invited Hyuksu and Bell to join the guild, and the man remarked that the name sounded pretty good, and Bell liked it too. She excitedly exclaimed that now that the guild was created, she would first look for a base for them and then asked what he would do next. He told her that he was going to keep the promise he made to Barrett, and she asked in surprise, "What promise?" He told her that Barrett had recently told him something. If he ever created a guild, he should find him. And to keep this promise, he will set off for the kingdom of Goyard right now. When news of the guild's creation reached His Majesty, he did something that outraged his servants. How can he give land to a stranger? This is too much. Barrett said he knows this. To obtain land, one must perform worthy deeds, and they think he looks like someone who makes such decisions frivolously. Then the protagonist received a call from Kim Po. He answered and asked, "Hello." The man greeted him and said that thanks to him, the broadcast went really well. He hoped it would be the same next time. They would gladly invite him again. He was grateful. The total donations were 37 million won, and after deducting the commission, he would receive about 25 million. He would also receive 10 million won as a bonus for setting a new record. Then he awkwardly added about sending money to the blacksmith Hansu. The protagonist smiled and said that if he transferred it to his account, he would split the amount in half and give it to him. He replied that he understood, then they would see each other again. He said, "Yes, see you later." Then he looked at the phone screen and said, "Wow. The donations alone are already 25 million won. In that case, in just 10 days, including the sale of the glove, he received about a 100 million won. Then Bell wrote, "Hansu, can he log in now?" He replied, "Yes. He'll log in now." After a while, he found himself in the village square. Bell ran up to him shouting, "Hansu." She clenched her fists and smiling shouted, "He's incredibly popular right now. This is no joke." Not only is Black Anvil inviting him to join their ranks, but Hansu's forge has surpassed 410,000 subscribers, and it's ranked 49th among Korean forges. Hyunsu, is he even listening to her? He smiled awkwardly and scratching the back of his head said, "It's all thanks to how well she manages everything, Belle." Then she smiled awkwardly and closing her eyes, apologized and said that she got a little carried away. By the way, he said he was heading to the Goyard Kingdom. Did he have everything prepared? He replied, yes. He had prepared thoroughly. He repaired some damaged equipment he recently received as a quest reward using his own method. He plans to show it to Barrett and build trust. She remarked that it was an excellent idea. She clenched her fist and added, this time he should get a hidden quest too. In response, he thanked her for always looking out for him. She looked at him, and he put his hands to his face and asked, is there something on his face? She yelped, no. Nothing. Then she awkwardly added, about that matter of theirs, she's still searching, but she hasn't been able to find it yet. She'll let you know as soon as she finds it. He smiled and told her not to rush the search. He was grateful to her. After some time, Marquis Vallo, Lord of the Goyard Kingdom, looked at the animal and asked Barrett, His Highness, has he developed a new hobby? Wolves? He petted the wolf and said it was a congratulatory gift from the last dungeon lord. Vallo said he congratulates him again, His Highness. By the way, he heard that he plans to grant land to a stranger. Is that true? Barad was surprised. Why was he asking? Was there a problem? He replied that he was speaking cautiously, but he thought it was a bit excessive. Giving land to a mere blacksmith, wasn't he just a rookie? He replied that Hunso had saved his life. Did he still intend to object? Vallo said, in keeping with the traditions of the Goyard kingdom. But before he could finish, Barad noticed the wolf's reaction, and then a subordinate said, Your Highness, Hyun-soo has arrived. They both looked at the door, and the protagonist walked into the room, a huge black wolf looming behind him. Vallo looked at him in surprise and wondered if the blacksmith's aura. Then the protagonist reached out and said, Your Highness Barad, he has returned. After a while, they sat down at the table and Barad, taking a cup, said that the atmosphere here had changed quite drastically in such a short time. Is it because of this equipment? MC nodded and replied, Yes. As expected, His Highness is insightful. This is Fenrir's helmet and cloak. Not only do they increase stats, they also grant the wolf's majesty. Barad asked, Did he do that too? Then the protagonist reached for his cloak and said that it wasn't so. He only repaired the equipment he received as a reward. Then he looked at the animal and said, Judging by the wolf's reaction, it seems the effect worked as intended. By the way, His Highness, may he know why he called him? Barad then looked out the window and said, In the west of the kingdom, there's a small territory called Wallace. Wallace is a village of blacksmiths. Just a few years ago it was thriving, but now one could say it has completely fallen apart. The situation is bad enough to affect neighboring territories, so there's a lot of talk among the nobles. They've set many talented people to restore Wallace, but every time, it's been a waste of effort. And for some reason, no one can understand why. They always end up fleeing the village as if escaping from something. And then he met him, and when he saw the sword he made, he was sure. The one who can solve the Wallace problem is him. At that moment, a system window appeared stating that he must restore the western territory of Wallace. Rank S, restricted only to those who have received Barad's offer. Reward, 10,000 gold for every 10% increase in territorial development. Penalty for failure, decreased trust level with Barad.
Description.
The problematic territory of Wallace in the kingdom of Goyard has been declining at a certain point. He must find the cause and restore it to its former glory. Then the protagonist looked at the scroll in his hand and thought, Restore the city, something he's never done before. Then he said, Your Majesty, he knows. He has no experience rebuilding cities. But if this is a blacksmith's town, if their lives can improve even a little thanks to him, he will do it. He will rebuild Wallace. After some time, the territory of Wallace, Belle walked forward and said that she heard that this is a blacksmith's village, but there are so many closed shops. Benson looked to the side and added, Judging by how few people there is definitely a serious problem. Then Belle looked to the side and asked if they should look around a little more. And MC also looked around and thought that things were worse here than he expected. After that, Belle pointed at a building and said, There is a light on over there. Maybe they should check. After some time, they entered the building. And the protagonist asked, Is there anyone here? Then they walked further. And Belle, looking at the cobwebs, asked, Someone must live here, right? And the protagonist said that he apologized. Benson then looked to the side and shouted, Is anyone here? Then they turned their attention to the door and became wary. The door began to open slightly and Paraheo appeared out. He held out a lamp and asked who they were and why had they barged in. The protagonist apologized for such a sudden intrusion. He added that they had come on the orders of His Highness Barad to inspect the village. Pura asked, So they weren't from the Edrol Merchant Guild? The protagonist clarified, Edrol? He then held out a scroll and said he didn't know who it was about. But if he didn't believe it, here was His Highness's decree. With that, he unrolled the scroll. He walked to the door and, placing the scroll next to it, said he would leave it here. They would step aside, and he could examine it for now. Then Para took the scroll and after a few seconds said that it truly was His Highness's seal. It had been a while since he had seen strangers. Then he came out to them and, introducing himself, said he was my lady's personal blacksmith. The protagonist approached him and said, Almost all the forges in the village are closed. Did something happen? He replied, The Edrol Guild broke into the village a year ago. That's how it all started. MC said, The Edrol Guild, the ones he was talking about. He replied, It's a long story. Would they listen to an old man? Rumors had reached the guild that blacksmiths were gathering here, so they showed up. The guild master presented all sorts of expensive gifts. They gained their trusts and offered a deal. My lady wanted to glorify the weapons of their masters, so she happily agreed. That's how the Edrol guild infiltrated the village. And one day at dinner, the guild master suddenly proposed a bet. It was naively taken as a joke, but the outcome was disastrous. Having lost the bet, my lady lost all her power. The tyranny of the Edrol guild began. Many blacksmiths tried to escape, but those who failed faced total slavery. Then Belle commented on how vile it was. The protagonist thought not only had they deceived and exploited the men, but they'd also taken everything they had. He frowned and thought he couldn't let it go. Then he asked, "Old man, did that mean he worked for them too?" He looked away and replied that it wasn't so. He was just a fugitive. The day my lady lost the bet, she sent him away with orders to win the bet and save the blacksmiths. Then Benson folded his arms and said, "Since my lady entrusted him with this, does that mean he has the skill to win it back?" He closed his eyes and said, "He may have a nasty character, but you can't drink away his talent." Then he rose from his seat and added, "However, you can't run forever. They'll come for him soon." Then he walked in the opposite direction and thanked them for listening to the old man's whining. They should leave quickly before they got caught up in it. Then MC told him to wait. He put his hand to his chest and added, if he allowed it, he'd like to help him. Para turned and asked him, and he said he was a blacksmith too, and he couldn't turn a blind eye to such injustice. Para said he appreciated his impulse, but all the blacksmiths who came to this village at that moment, Bucks, a member of the Edrel Merchant Guild, entered the room and shouted, "That's where he's hiding, the old rat." The others looked at him in surprise, and then he walked forward and added, he'd been running for a long time, but now he wasn't leaving. It was his turn to accept the guild's bet. After that, he put his sword to Pura's throat and said, if he refuses, he'll pay with his life. Already formed a new gang? Then he took out an object, and a space began to appear around them. He looked at it and smiling said, "This is the Forge of Dreams. Relying on knowledge, intuition, and experience, one can forge equipment here at incredible speed." Noticing this, Belle shouted, "This is absurd." Benson added, "This isn't a bet but a threat." At that moment, a system window appeared stating, Para, level 230. Bucks, level 299. He said the difference in levels was colossal. Defeating him would spare his life. True. He would still have to spend the rest of his days in slavery. Then a system window appeared in front of Para, stating that the test was about to begin. If he failed the test, punishment would follow. He must state his conditions. At that moment, he lowered his gaze and thought there was no turning back. Then he looked ahead and said, if he wins, he will cancel the bet with my lady and free all the blacksmiths. He must completely cancel the debt. Then the system announced that his life was at stake. The conditions accepted. Then Bucks pointed his finger back and shouted, does he know how much effort he spent to find it? He must take the hammer quickly. Then he looked at Para and added, whoever forges the best sword wins. He replied that he understood. Then the protagonist took Para by the hand and said, Sir. He said that they had only known each other for a short time, but he was grateful to him. But then he walked into space and the protagonist looked after him. After that, Para let out a loud sigh and began to create the weapon. He thought that he must forge the best sword in his life. He began to strike the blank with the hammer and then heated it up. The next second, he looked to the side, looking at Buck's finished sword. He thought, as a blacksmith, he feels in his gut, this sword is a masterpiece. It is a complete disaster. Soon it will be gone, and these lands too. Then he heard a scream. He must concentrate. He turned around and noticed how the protagonist began to hit the wall and shouted at him to pull himself together. He should only think about the blade. The temperature is dropping. He must watch the color of the flame. Then Para returned to crafting the weapon, and the protagonist continued to shout. He must increase the temperature. He still has a chance. At that moment, a system window appeared, and Para looked at it in surprise, and then he turned his gaze to the protagonist. The system window said he was receiving the teachings of the blacksmith master. He shouted in surprise, him? At that moment, the man in the control room clenched his fists and shouted, damn it. He slammed his hands on the table and added, he put so much into it and he had to run into Hansu of all people. And Soyeon looked at him and said, Bucks, isn't he just a passing character? He grabbed his head and shouted, a passing character? He's the 11th legend of the new continent, she shouted in surprise. What? He said that if all the legends were good, it would be boring. He planned to make him the new villain. Then So Yun looked at Tae-suk and said, no way. His clash with Hyun-soo won't backfire, will it? He paused, tilting his head and saying he didn't even know. They couldn't intervene directly anyway. All they could do was watch. Meanwhile, the system reported receiving instructions from the master blacksmith. Para asked in surprise, Masters? And the protagonist shouted, he must concentrate. He can't relax. Time is short, so it's better to temper in oil, not water. Para followed his advice, and MC said that when sharpening the blade, he should apply even pressure. The next second, Bucks raised his sword and Para did the same. The protagonist thought almost simultaneously. Then Para's face broke out in sweat and he said, it's done. A system window appeared in front of him, stating that Para had created an artifact close to legendary. He looked at the weapon in his hand and then Bell raised a finger and said, they say this artifact is almost legendary. Benson added, any swordsman's dream. He looked at the protagonist and thought that defeating such an opponent with just one level was impossible. But thanks to Hansu's guidance, he surpassed himself. At that moment, the system reported that he had surpassed the blacksmith expert, Para. Buck said, it's impossible. The system reported that he had passed Para's test, and he began to cry and said that he couldn't believe that he was able to create such a sword before his death. And Bucks clenched his teeth in irritation. The system reported that he had failed the test. All blacksmiths in Wallace territory are freed. The contract is terminated. Territory development has increased by 10%. The next second, Bucks released the sword from his hands and said that he admitted defeat. Then he stepped forward and added, but he, an outsider, he interfered with the sacred test. He grabbed the sword and said, that's why he challenges him to a duel. With these words, he pointed the gun at the protagonist and a system window appeared in front of him saying, the trial is beginning. He was surprised. What was he to? After a while, the man in the control room fell to his knees and, clutching his head, shouted, Bucks, he shouldn't do this. And Soyeon said thoughtfully, in the end, Bucks did drag Han-soo into the trial. The man shouted, Manager Kim. He grabbed Tae-suk by the leg and asked what he thought would happen if Han-soo fought Bucks. Did he have a chance? He answered, out of the question. Han-soo is the god of blacksmithing. The man asked, then is there a chance that Han-soo will just let Bucks go in peace? He replied, judging by what Han-soo had done before, the chances are 0, and So Yun said that they would just wait and see. Then Tae-seok looked at the monitor screen and said, so who's testing whom here? Han-soo isn't the kind of person to be judged by level numbers alone. Meanwhile, MC looked at the sword in Buck's hands and thought, it's an artifact. So the problem was with the sword. Then Bucks pointed the weapon at him and said that if he fails the test, he'll cut off his arm. And the protagonist thought, he forced people to obey. Idiots like him shouldn't even exist. Then he said, his conditions are his sword. In response, Buck smiled and said, okay, this will be a forging speed test. He let go of the sword and pointing his finger at it said, it tests a blacksmith's normal speed, knowledge, and experience. You need to create a product in just a few dozen seconds. They'll start right now. At that moment or appeared in front of them and Bucks thought, judging by his appearance, this stranger is at most a mid-level blacksmith. It looks like he only has a talent for teaching. Then he began to concentrate energy in his hands and thought, if this continues, victory is in the bag. Then he said, great, it should be at least a unique rank. The next second, a bright light burst from his crystal, and he covered his face with his hands and shouted, what? He looked at the protagonist who was holding a sword. The system reported that a legendary rank sword had been created. Buck said in surprise, his sword is only a unique rank. No. Did he finish before him? And the system reported that he had lost the challenge. Ownership of the created sword had been transferred. He was surprised. What? And then the sword appeared in the protagonist's hand. He said that without this sword, he would no longer be able to torment people. He was indignant, his sword. And MC came closer and said, he's just paying for everything he's done. And Buck fell to the ground and shouted that it was impossible. And the protagonist pointed the sword at him and told him to name his crimes. In response, he sighed, bit his lip, and then said that he collected a 70% tax from blacksmiths. He asked and he gritted his teeth and added, and those who couldn't pay, he turned into slaves. The protagonist asked, he even threw Melody into prison, right? He replied that it was necessary for the guild's profits. At that moment, Para shouted, imprisoning the lord and exploiting the blacksmiths was unfair. And then the protagonist asked, so where did he hide everything he squeezed out of them? Bucks knelt down and said, "In the basement of the guild building." He asked, "Is that all?" He looked away and replied, "Right, that's enough. He has told everything, so he begs for mercy." The next second, he grabbed the sword and then pointed it at the protagonist and shouted, "Does he think he's gonna die so easily?" And then the protagonist said, "Buried Sword Art Chapter 2. He grabbed the sword then threw it up, making it spin. He said, "Blade of the Furious Tide." At that moment, Bucks looked at him in bewilderment and the sword fell from his hands and the protagonist punched him in the face and the next second caught the spinning sword, after which he swung it in front of himself, cutting off Buck's arm. He said that compared to what he had done, this was nothing, but it was not his place to judge him. He moved on and approaching Purah said, "Sir, he apologizes for frightening him. This man will not harm anyone again. He leaves the punishment to his discretion." Purah was surprised. Did he mean to say that he should pass the sentence? Then he looked at Bucks and said, "Perhaps he would not mind if the right of punishment went to my lady?" In response, Bucks indignantly shouted, "Hey, who do you think you are to decide his fate?" Then Benson gagged him and told him to shut up. Bell suggested that he just shut his mouth. Then MC approached Purah and asked, "Where is Melody now?" He replied that she must be imprisoned in the castle. He asked him to bring her here. He would leave this man's punishment to him. Purah looked at him in surprise and then said that he was grateful. Truly, he was very grateful. With these words, he shook the protagonist's hand. And sometime later, Belen was sitting in the dungeon, hugging her knees. She looked ahead in surprise, hearing a sound, and said that no one was supposed to come here. Then she noticed Purah, who was holding onto the bars and shouting, "Melody." And she cried out in surprise, "Him, how did he get here?" Okay. The important thing is that it's dangerous here. He must run. But the next second, he inserted the lock into the keyhole and said, "Everything is fine, Melody. Now she can leave this place." He asks her to come with him. They went out into the corridor and she asked in surprise, "But what's going on here? Can he explain?" He told her not to be afraid that a stranger had saved their lands. She asked, "What?" He said he had defeated that villain, Bucks. She asked, "A stranger?"
Impossible.
But no. More importantly, did the stranger defeat Bucks? Purah turned to her and said he was telling her the pure truth. She only needed to punish him severely. Then he placed his hand on his chest and added, "All of this was done by one true blacksmith." She bit her thumb and said, "Impossible." Then he extended his hand to her and asked her to trust him, that she would see with her own eyes and understand. Then she closed her eyes and after that they walked to the exit. After a while, Purah opened the door for her and asked her to come in, "My lady." She walked inside and cried out in surprise. She noticed Bucks sitting on his knees with his severed hand, and then the protagonist asked, "She's my lady?" She removed her hood and confirmed it. Then she said she was Belen, Lord of the Wallace lands. He had indeed defeated him. The protagonist noticed that it was all true. Initially, they planned to leave the punishment to Lord Purah, but he said to leave it to her, "My lady." She stepped forward and said, "In that case." She wrapped up her sleeve and said, since they needed to talk, could he please take the bandage off his mouth? And then Buck's bandage was taken off and he screamed, "What the hell?" She said, "Bucks." She trusted him and did business with him. She could even tolerate deception, and he smirked. The one who was deceived is a fool himself. But she added, "But touching people on her land is unforgivable. As lord of this territory, she gives the order Purah." He approached her and said, "Yes, my lady." She ordered the confiscation of all the property this man had illegally appropriated and the release of all the oppressed blacksmiths. In response, Purah bowed and said that he understood her, "My lady." And when Benson grabbed Bucks, he screamed, "What nonsense! This is his property. They are his slaves." And Benson shouted, "Attention." Then Belen appeared to him again and said, "And also, Bucks, she will make sure that he will never harm innocent people again. He will be locked in the dungeon for eternity." He looked at her in bewilderment and then Benson threw him over his shoulder, but Bucks continued to scream, "No. This cannot be. He is not finished yet." Benson carried him further and said, "Enough." Then he turned slightly and said, "If they leave him here, he will continue to talk nonsense, so he will take him to the castle." Bucks continued to scream, "He must put him down. Idiot. This is simply ridiculous. How dare he do this to him?" After this, MC turned to Belen and asked, "My lady." He would explain the situation in detail. She nodded. After a while, they sat down at a table and Belen, putting her cup on a saucer, said, "This is what happened. He asked why she stood up. She bowed and said that she was truly very grateful to him. Her tears began to fall on the table, and she added that due to her lack of skills, she was unable to properly take care of the territory. If she had been even a little wiser, this would not have happened. At that moment, Pura took her hand and said, "No, my lady. This is the fault of someone who came with malicious intent. She did everything she could for her people." Then Belen took his hand and thanked him for those words. She wiped away a tear and added, she showed a shameful side of herself. But the protagonist said that this was not at all the case. He understood everything perfectly. Then he rose from his seat and said, "Come to think of it, he never introduced himself." He then introduced himself, and Belen did the same, bowing and saying she didn't know how to express her gratitude for saving the territory. The protagonist awkwardly held his hands out in front of him and said he only did what he had to. Belle agreed with him, and Belen added that she apologized for misunderstanding them. Belle was surprised, misunderstood. What was she talking about? She said that when Para said that an outsider helped them, she didn't believe it. She had heard since childhood that outsiders were all selfish and only tried to use them. But today made her realize something. There are good outsiders like him, and she sincerely thanks them for protecting her territory. MC looked at her and thought that he came because of Barrett's request, but he was very glad that he came because they were able to save those two and the suffering blacksmiths too. Then Belen said she wanted to repay all those who saved her territory. She intended to give them half of everything confiscated from Bucks, but the protagonist shook his head and said, "No, please. She should use the money for the blacksmiths' territory." For them, simply seeing these territories restored to their former glory was more than enough. At that moment, Belen covered her mouth in embarrassment and made a surprised sound, and Para said that he was truly very grateful. At that moment, the protagonist looked in surprise at the system window, which said that the Lord's Favor had been activated. Lord's Favor, a unique title. Rank S special ability. When someone decides they have received a special favor from him for life, there is a 3% chance of activation. Upon activation, such a person will feel a desire to be with him, high respect and loyalty. They may also experience strong emotions, and they may ask to become his vassal. The current number of activations is 1 person. The protagonist looked at this in bewilderment and wondered, which one of them is it?